All right, it is 9:04 a.m. on Tuesday, June 20th, and I'd like to call to order this special meeting of the Board of Trustees. And Clerk Rodriguez, can you please do the roll call?
Yes, Madam President. Trustee Church.
Here.
And Trustee Mayberry will be delayed. Vice President Nicolette.
Good morning.
I'm here. President Smith.
Here.
Trustee Westlake.
Here.
And Trustee Woodley is delayed as well?
Yes.
Okay. Madam President, we do have a quorum.
Wonderful. And then when both Trustees Woodley and Mayberry arrive, we will welcome them on the record when they do. Thank you so much, Clerk Rodriguez. All right. So with us today, we have an esteemed guest. He is the founder, originator, and one true source of knowledge for balanced governance. We are very grateful to have him here at the Washoe County School District and the knowledge that he invests in us to serve our children, our staff, and our community. Dr. Thomas Alsbury, would you do us the honor of the pledge?
Oh, that'd be my pleasure. Thank you.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much, Dr. Alsbury. All right, that closes out section 1 for our opening items, and now we will move on to our second section. These are items for presentation, discussion, and information. And we'll first move to item 2.01, the presentation, discussion, and review of the Washoe County School District Board of Trustees Balanced Governance Self-Assessment, facilitated by Dr. Thomas Alsbury, including a review of areas of growth, opportunity, and effectiveness of the trustees. This is an item for presentation and discussion, and our presenter is Dr. Thomas Alsbury, who we welcome. And I'm very pleased to pass this over to you. Thank you so much, Dr. Alsbury.
All right. Well, thank you for having me. It's great to be back with you. Wanted to just describe, you have quite a few different items in your packet today, in your folder, so we might want to just get those out here for a second so we can all be clear on what we're going to be looking at when. We're going to, we have 3 different topics that we'll be covering today. Let me just advance the slide. You can see them up here on the slide right now. We'll be doing a executive summary overview of the recent comprehensive board evaluation and my recommendations for the board as a result of those findings. Then looking at the superintendent evaluation process for the next year, 23-24, and making some decisions on the indicators that will be the focus for that superintendent evaluation. You might remember that we selected those performance indicators for the superintendent evaluation for this year. We did that in October of 2022, if you remember back then. And so we need to do the same thing for this coming year. So we have our focus target goals for the superintendent. And then finally, we'll just do a review of this year's superintendent evaluation process, what that's going to look like, because that's coming really quickly, and we'll be actually needing to start the steps of that evaluation process in August. Yeah, even before we get out of the summer. So good idea for us to review and make sure everyone is clear on the board on how that process is going to go, and give you a chance to ask any questions you have and so forth. Okay, so we have a lot to do. We're going to try to do it relatively quickly. Okay, so let's see how we do. Now, in the packet, the first thing, if you'll pull this out, I'll be referencing the evaluation. You did receive this from me when we did our one-on-one review, and so since we've already done that review, I'll just be hitting the highlights of this report. But there are reference page numbers and so forth to the actual evaluation, which JJ has given you a copy. So anytime you want to thumb to a spot in that as I'm going through my findings, you're welcome to do that. In addition to that, there are 3 different packets. They sort of look the same on the front, but I've labeled them as item 2.01, 2.02, and 2.03 just to kind of keep straight what materials we're using for each portion of our meeting today. And so we will start with 2.01. And if you open that packet up to page 3, you'll see the agenda. So there's the agenda. It's the same things that you see on the screen, but with some times attached to it and break time and things like that that may be of interest. All right. I think that gets us what we need to move on. So let's move on. So as always in our any kind of discussions or comments that we make, we want to use our 5R parameters that you see here on the screen. So we see highly effective boards use these approaches when they're conversing with each other and engaging in their board meetings. So let's get to the report. There are some of the preliminary, this is, I know that you all know this already. We've reviewed it, but for the sake of anybody who might be listening in, a comprehensive evaluation was conducted of the board. In that evaluation, there were 3 frameworks that were looked at. One are the governance standards, that is balanced governance standards and indicators of highly effective boards nationally. The second was a look at individual trustee practice and how each individual trustee engages in their particular role on the board. And then finally, board meeting protocols. So how are board meetings basically being implemented and run? In that, what we engaged in together was, first off, I reviewed all of your meetings from that previous year. There were 14 meetings, so I looked at all of the agendas and reviewed all of the minutes of those meetings. I also did time checks and the number of topics of significance that you discuss at each of those meetings to help get a sense of where you are as a board. In addition to that, I and another colleague individually and separately observed with a pause button 12 hours of board meetings where we analyzed in depth. In fact, I tallied each and every comment that you as a board made in those meetings, which, by the way, if you wondered, came up to 234 specific and individual remarks that were made by trustees. So it was a fun time. The meetings were January 24th and March 14th of 2023, as you can see on the screen. So, in addition to that, the trustees themselves engaged in participating in some in-depth surveying where they did self-assessments in 2 different areas. That is the standards and then their own individual practice. So taking all that together creates a picture of where the board is and areas that the board might be able to make some improvements in. So we'll get to that now. We're going to start with the board meeting practices and what did we find. So this goes to my observations and my colleagues' observations. By the way, with that, we come together. We do these observations and we do these analysis separately from each other. And then we come together and compare notes to see if we came to the same conclusions, and we did. If we don't, then we work that out and make decisions. But in this case, we had similar findings in our evaluation. The strengths. So we're just doing an executive summary. Remember, we're not going to go into a lot of the detail again because you and I have done that already individually, and you've received the report. So hopefully you've had a chance to look at that if you wanted to. The strengths are listed up here. That is that what we're doing, just again to be clear for anybody who's listening, is that we've conducted the only national and I'll say this just for interest's sake, the only international school board studies that have ever been conducted. We've conducted 2 national studies in the United States, and then in that second national study, we also simultaneously worked with 8 different countries, many of which were in the top 5 highest performing countries on the international tests. Taiwan, for example, and Finland were 2 of the partners that engaged with us. And there was a book that came out of that on the findings, and it was all kind of interesting. But what we're doing is we're taking that data, the actual data that we correlated with board behaviors, board standards, how they run their meetings, against the performance of the district, the turnover rates of administrators, teachers, superintendents in the district. So a number of metrics that point us to high performance or to effective practice. And we saw some real differences between high performing and actually low performing. This is in agreement. All of our findings on those national studies agreed with all of the previous research that has been done in this field. And by the way, in that first packet, this first workshop materials packet, you'll see that on pages 4 through 7, I've included a list of peer-reviewed research on boards that I'm speaking about. So if you ever have an interest, you can go to those studies and take a look. But our findings were the same, and what that allows me to do is benchmark your results in this evaluation against high-performing boards. Okay, that's the key. So when I say you have strengths, what that means is you are engaging in these particular items that are on the screen the same as high-performing boards do, and you're not doing what low-performing boards do. In this case, average meeting time, and I'll just mention that I'm not going to go into all the details, but I'll just mention that, for example, low-performing boards either have very, very long board meetings, or they have very, very short board meetings. And it's back to the balanced governance concept. If you are a rubber stamp board, you're not really that interested. You want to get in and out as fast as possible. And so your meetings are very, very short. They're just a series of unanimous votes, usually. The meetings are done in an hour, hour and a half. If you're a board member on the opposite end, or a board on the micromanaging end, where you're really focusing on things that you should not be focusing on, or you're misunderstanding your role, you are into the weeds in every topic. And those board meetings run on, and they will run 4, 5, 6, 7, even longer. Amazingly, there have been board meetings like that. So you don't want to be in either one of those extremes. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Dr. Ellsbury. I just want to welcome for the record Trustee Alex Woodley, who has joined us. Yeah. And then also, while you're describing that, I don't know if anyone else is having flashbacks, but I am too.
So, yeah, and welcome, Trustee Woodley. I should have paused when you came in the door. Nice to see you. Yeah, so in terms of your average meetings, you're in a sweet spot. Your meetings are about the right length. The number of topics you're trying to tackle in the meetings are right about where you want them to be. And the balance of what you're doing in your meetings in terms of how you balance presentations or recognitions versus the business that you're doing is very, very well balanced, right up there with highly effective boards. So those are some of the strengths. Some of the areas they are developing in terms of how your meetings are going. The first one is listed here. So in analyzing all 14 meetings from 2022-23 that I looked at up through mid-March of 2023, what you want is you want about 70% of your focus, that is the time that you spend discussing and having presentations from the staff focused on monitoring the progress on your strategic goals, and particularly those goals that are most directly affecting student learning. And in this case, this is an area of growth, because you can see that your topics that were directly related to student learning were about 35, just shy of 35%. So more of the topics that you discuss on the meetings that we evaluated were were not direct. They were supportive topics. That would be important topics, but supportive. So things like safety and facilities and discipline handbooks and those kinds of things. Again, very important and important to kids learning even, but not as directly important to their student learning improvements. Now, there's some good news to this number. So we want that number to be more like closer to 70% than 35%. But the good news is that, and it's one of the reasons that I decided to, even though we didn't really talk about this, I decided to go ahead and analyze all of your minutes for all of the meetings, not just the two. And you can see that I've put on the screen what we found, and that is that the 2022 meetings, about 7% of the topics were direct student learning, direct to strategic goals. But the 2023 meetings, you were up to 56%. So, and the reason that I decided to do that is probably obvious, and that's because Superintendent Enfield, when a new superintendent comes in, it takes a little time to, make some modifications and changes, first to learn what's going on, how it's going, and then to begin to make those changes. And so our feeling was that the superintendent is already redirecting the topics and assisting in moving the topics more and more toward monitoring strategic goals. So I think that's very good, and my recommendation would be to just keep that trend up. So you can see that my recommendations here are to continue that journey to focus more and more. Yeah, go ahead.
Thanks, Dr. Ellsbury. I just wanted to point out that, the benefit of having a fresh superintendent come in is that coming in as you have fresh eyes and can say, hey, we can do things differently and pare things down. And I play a role in that, in how staff prepares for presentations and being clear on when we need to do a PowerPoint and when we don't, right? But it also is in the crafting of the agenda. And so I will say that under President Smith's leadership, with BLT, with Vice President Nicolette and Clerk Rodriguez, these agendas are very, very intentional about what we put on when, how we don't overload. So there's, I think, a strategy now to developing our agendas that may not have been as present in the past.
Yep. Yeah, well said.
Thank you. I appreciate you saying that. JJ, if we could go back on that previous slide. Knowing, of course, the foundational elements of balanced governance, that percentage change is very deliberate, and I'm glad to see that we're moving in the right direction in terms of the things that we should be talking about and deciding on. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And this is actually in your policy. So a lot of what I found in going back and rereading all of your policies again and reviewing them is that the good news is that there's not a lot of policy work that I see. I didn't see really much at all, if any. So this is not a matter of needing to go back and modify your governance policies. They're already in place. It's just a matter of doing a good job of implementing what you've already got. So you see my policy references on this slide. So the work that President Smith and Superintendent Enfield just talked about is part of policy 9110 and also 9115. And it specifically talks about that agendas should be well planned and focused on progress checking of strategic goals that are more directed or influencing student learning. So there it is. So congratulate you on that. The next area is called bridging and bonding. I'll move on to that. And what we want to see here, I'll remind everybody that bonding is conversations, comments that are made that build the teamwork of the board. I want to remind everyone that under most circumstances, and what I mean by circumstances is that, we sometimes run into a crisis. I would say that COVID was an example of one of those community-wide, in this case nationally wide, crises that really required boards to shift and to change from their focus of teamwork and kind of business as usual to really reaching out to the public and making sure that the public knew that you were listening to them and hearing them on various really big, potentially polarizing topics like the whole mask debates and so forth. So this is not a one-size-fits-all. Like, you can't say that you should always be bonding and never be bridging, but there has actually been research done. It's cited in these pages that I mentioned. If you can go read it. And in my 2015 book, there's a chapter, because I invited the authors of this research to write about it in that book. But they found that under normal circumstances, which I would say we're in now, these days, that more high effective boards are focused predominantly on bonding, that is, working together as a team, and then they're careful with the bridging work that they do. What you want to avoid, and what low performing boards do, is they engage in what I call anti-bonding and anti-bridging comments. So anti-bonding is when you're making remarks to each other that tear down your trust in each other and your ability to work together. That's the mark of a board headed in the wrong direction. So you want to avoid that. And like in all of these things, I've told you guys this in every board that I work with before, that I'm probably going to make everybody uneasy by the time I'm done, because I'm not here to tell the person sitting next to you that they should change. I'm here for you to look at yourself, and ask yourself, am I doing this? And to the extent that you are, then I would recommend that you stop doing those kinds of things, because they're not good for you as a team. All right? Yeah.
Dr. Ellsbury, just for anybody who watches this after, could you just give some non-specific to us, but just high-level examples of bonding and bridging? And I'm willing to bet we'll probably be able to figure out the inverse from the anti based on that.
Yeah, I sure will. So bonding is usually pretty clear to everybody. When you hear it, you know it. It doesn't have to be explained. If you make a remark you're obviously taking a shot at one of your fellow trustees. But I would even say, I want to be really even more subtle about this, and I did talk with the board members individually, one-on-one. This was part of the evaluation prior to this meeting. And this is one of the things we discussed, that you don't have to make a remark about somebody else to say where your position is. So the simple fix is try to sort of get yourself to leave off the other part of the comment. So a comment that can be anti-bonding could be even saying, if one of the trustees said something, gave your opinion about something, and I was the next trustee up to speak, and I said, I disagree with Trustee Westlake, I disagree with Trustee Rodriguez, with Trustee Smith. Here's what I think. Even that little additional kind of starter comment can be viewed very negatively, and it's really unnecessary. You don't need to do that. Highly effective boards don't do that. Even when everybody knows that, if they've watched the board meetings, that these board members, these trustees, do not agree with each other at all. They could be very, very opposed to each other on a topic. Simply state what they think. So it's, thank you very much, Trustee Rodriguez. Let me tell you how this is how I feel about this topic, period, and then stop there. So any kinds of additional remarks that are polarizing, and certainly negative remarks, are very, very clear to everybody that those are out of line. But even those subtle ones, I would recommend that you be careful about that. And you can do that conversely by piling on. We don't see effective boards do that. So, for example, if Trustee Nicolette said something, I said, yeah, I totally agree with Trustee Nicolette. Here's what I think. Now, I know that seems really innocent, But that can even, if it's taken too far, you can even pile on, which is then negating what maybe a minority viewpoint thinks. And we want to be very careful about that, particularly with certain topics. So again, I know I'm being very picky about this, but I'm just telling you that what we see in highly effective boards is they just don't go there on either side. Okay. Anti-bridging. This one's a little bit trickier, and here's the caution that I would give, is that we have to remember as a board that we are representing a very wide expanse of ideas, viewpoints, ideologies that are very strongly held by folks. When we get to issues that values issues, people get very emotional and intense about those things, and you're not likely to change their minds, all right? And so for boards that are highly effective, what we notice is that they're very careful, even when they're trying to do bridging, is when I'm trying to have the public, bring the public voice in. Like, so a group from the outside or an idea from the outside community. Really effective trustees are really good at bringing ideas in, but not characterizing them in a way that is polarizing. So for example, let me give you some of the things to avoid, okay? So rule number 1, don't attach what you're going to say in a meeting to a person, an organization, or a group from the community. That's rule number 1. You speak as a trustee. You don't speak as a mouthpiece for your neighbor who told you something, or one parent that told you something, or one organization. Now that might again seem innocent, but the problem is that in your policy and one of your commitments is that if individuals or small groups come to you with a concern, you are to redirect them through the chain of command, through the system, to get answers to their questions, and hopefully, we all hope, get their issues resolved. So you don't speak for the group. You don't want to speak for the group. Because whenever you speak for a group, you inevitably polarize, because and especially in this climate that we find ourselves in these days, we're getting down to like a 50-50 split. Everybody, we seem to have half the folks agree with one viewpoint and half agree with the other. So you're always going to insult or make mad or disrespect about half of the parents, community members, etc., of whom you are governing. You are governing for everyone, not for just that one little group that you happen to personally agree with. So how do you deal with that? I mean, that's a challenging thing. And what we see is that effective board members deal with that by simply not equating it to another entity. That doesn't mean they don't share their viewpoint. Now, if you have a particular viewpoint, trustees will share that, and they'll even share it in a strong way. I believe that this is important. You might be able to, I think it's safe to say, we are hearing in the community, or I am hearing in the community, that this is a concern. Let me share that with you. But don't say, my neighbor said, this particular group, giving the name of the group. Because what you're doing is you're telling that group, you know what, you don't have to work through the school system anymore. You can just call me or email me or text me, and I'll bring your question right to the school board meeting. So why should I go talk with the teacher, the principal, why should I go get my problem solved with that if I got the big cheese on the phone and then I turn my TV on or whatever, and I'm going to watch you bring it up at a board meeting? There's no reason for me to go through the process that I should go through. So this is why board members understand that they need to be careful about that. So that's number 1. The second thing is, be careful that what you're sharing, I would say, understand that it is it can be polarizing. There may be a part of the community that says, yay, I'm really glad you just said that. At the exact same time, there's another half of the community saying, how dare you say that? So you think that you just bridged. There's a lot of comments in board meetings where even in some of your comments where I know that you thought the community was out there going, yay, I just bridged. I just made the community feel better about our district. And we're going, yeah, no, you just made part of the community feel good and part of the community really mad. And you just contributed to further polarizing the community. So I would say avoid remarks that are community-directed remarks that might be insulting to another viewpoint. So the best way to do that is to try to find a common interest rather than stating things in a positional manner. So let me pause there. I've given you a lot to think about. Any remarks or feelings about that?
That's what learning
That's
is
why we do
for.
evaluations.
Remember, we were just talking about Maya Angelou's quote, which I may not be getting this exactly right, but it's when you know better, you do better. And so that is the process. And we are the trustees of an actual school district, which is where learning happens. And so we demonstrate that learning. We demonstrate the humanity of error and rising to be better. So, I mean, if we can't demonstrate evolution and improvement, then how in the world are we going to ask our kids to do that? So, Trustee Church, I see your light on.
Thank you. Yeah, so much to say and cover, but basically, number one, our past board president, wonderful person, and ran great meetings, and so no criticism of that. Obviously, we used to go well late, and now we fixed that with our new board leadership, so that's wonderful. One quick criticism, self-criticism, while we cover topics that are more on point, in my opinion, too many of them are for discussion and presentation only. Therefore, the board simply can take no action. That's not reflected in there because the topics are germane, but I will put that out to my fellow trustees, food for thought. But overall, yeah, the new board president runs a great meeting and keeps our time frames down and that kind of stuff, so that's much appreciated.
Great. Yeah, so I would just say be careful about that kind of thing. And I also say it's not easy. Okay, what I'm sharing now is one of the most difficult, and for this board, this would be the primary focus that I would recommend to you. And remember that the community is watching, and they are responding not just to you, it will affect you. Part of our research is tracking elections of trustees. And it does affect trustees' tenure on the board. But more importantly, can negatively affect the school district. And that's where I get kind of happy, angry, whatever. I get emotional about it when it comes to kids. I mean, we can do things and blow it off as adults. And I've had board members make comments in board meetings, and then after the meetings, when the cameras are off and the mics are off, I'll see them over there chatting with each other, and they'll say, "Oh, we're fine. We know each other. We just do those things." Yeah, but we're still friends. Well, the public doesn't see that second conversation. All they know is that they're watching and they're listening, and what they heard doesn't sound like you guys are a coherent team leading a district for my kids. Get your act together is what they're going to say, and they're not going to be very forgiving about that kind of behavior amongst the people that they have entrusted leadership to their children, which they're going to be very passionate about. So it's worth the effort to try to individually self-reflect and be as careful as you can to, again, try to find an interest that is a joint interest. I'll give you it's probably not a great example. It's an example, but I don't know that it fits for Washoe. One example is there's an interest that we have, I believe, that's shared by probably everyone, that students who have greater need may need additional resources, okay? Now, that's an interest because there's a lot of students that fit in that category. There's some that we know about. When you disaggregate student performance data, we know that generally African American, Native American students, Alaskan American students, next in line would be Latino students, have an achievement gap to Caucasian students. So we usually think of that. But there's actually groups of other students. There's immigrant students, for example, sometimes quite a variety of immigrant students who have very similar gaps. And I could go on, and then I won't. I could go on and list. There's a lot of students that have need. You might think of language need. You might think of learning needs through special education. I mean, there's a lot of kiddos that need some extra help. I think everybody can agree that students that need additional help is a shared interest that everybody can get on board with. But we can inadvertently polarize folks if we name one of those groups and stop there, because we're immediately not intending to do it, but we're kind of telling anybody who's in one of those other groups that has just as much need that you don't matter to me. And that's where I say you can say something that you think is bridging, that you think is helpful, that could be damaging as well as helpful. And so try to think about that when we're getting onto topics so that we're not sort of drawing a line that separates us. There's another piece of data that I collected, and I'll tell you again that this was the kind of the big topic that I was kind of nervous to talk to you about, because it's the one area that I think there does need to be some improvement, some significant improvement. There are, as you can see, these are the number of comments of the 234 comments that were made over the course of those 12 hours of meetings. That if there was a shared kind of airtime amongst all the trustees, that would mean that each trustee would have made around 33 remarks over the course of that 12 hours of meetings. Now, obviously, it's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be exactly 33 remarks, but highly effective boards, we see them balanced again in terms of the airtime that they provide to each other. You can talk too much. You can also not talk enough. One of the interesting things, too, is that if you're dominating the meeting with your ideas as an individual trustee, I can tell you what other trustees are doing. They don't want to jump in and give their viewpoint or their thoughts from their constituents, because as the conversation goes on and on and on. And so they make choices in their mind to say, I'm just not going to make a comment. That can be dangerous for that trustee, because they have constituents that want to hear from them and they're not hearing from them. Or conversely, you can have a trustee that, because there's too much discussion from a couple of trustees going on in a meeting, they'll make the decision, okay, I'm only going to make a comment at a meeting if it's a topic that is really, really super important to me. But that's a problem for that trustee, because if I'm the public watching, what I notice is that trustee only comments on this one thing. And so you can then start to appear to be a one special interest type of a trustee, that you don't care about anything except for this program or this group of students. And we find that is not a positive. That doesn't lead to better support from the community for the district or the board. And so we want the trustees to represent all the students, all the programs, all the interests, and so we want to balance those comments as much as we possibly can. The other thing is that if we're dominating or we're engaging in kind of bonding, negative remarks, that type of thing in our comments, we're forcing, in this case, very directly, the president of the board has to engage you. And when, let me turn to my recommendations a bit, because in your own policies, there's a couple things, and I'm just going to read them because I think it's beneficial as a reminder, but policy 9115 says that we should, first of all, share viewpoints in a clear and concise manner. So that's one. Second thing, it specifically says that balanced participation should occur with everyone, every trustee, participating and no one dominating. And that's in your policy. That's a commitment that you've said you were going to try to make. So once again, I think it's important to have that balance. And if you don't have that balance, the president is going to be forced to engage you, to remind you of what the policies for the meeting are and what they're supposed to be. And what does that mean? That means that then the president is making more comments than they need to make or probably want to make. But they can't just sit there and say nothing. They have to engage a trustee if they're dominating. Now, there's a couple of other recommendations that I'm going to make, but I'm going to wait until a later slide, and because I think they're more relevant to that data, that new data from the surveys. Okay, so I'm going to pause there for that feedback. Now, remember, this is just based on our observations of your meeting compared to highly effective boards. Okay. All right. So this takes us to our second area of review, and this is from your own self-evaluations of how you think you're doing as a board. The two areas of strength are listed here. And there are 12 standards. These are two of them.
Dr. Ellsbury, so
Yeah.
the irony of this, and this is just all coincidental, is that, for example, in our July meeting, we're actually going to have an item on community engagement on the board, superintendent, and district level. So that's interesting to see that connection there too.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you for that.
Yeah. And so again, this is what you felt you were strong at. It's not what we viewed and felt. But although I will say that we are in agreement with each other. What we saw as strengths, you rated yourself as strong, and what we saw as areas of improve, you rated yourself lower in those areas and said, yeah, we need to improve in those areas. So there's no disagreement. You know.
And that's really good. That shows that we are evaluating ourselves in the same way as the subject matter experts. So that's the first step, is being able to be introspective and understand where you're strong and then where you have opportunities for growth. So you can't even get to step one if you don't have that. So that's good news.
Yeah. Areas where you rated yourself lower overall were in areas of accountability, standard, and the use of data for continuous improvement. And I think to understand this better requires a little unpacking of those to see what specific parts of those standards did you rate yourself lower in. So I've broken it down into a few specific items so that are themes that I saw from you of areas that you said you should improve. So this is the first one. You felt that you should improve in monitoring progress on strategic goals, focus on student learning. I've already talked about that today. So there it is. And interesting, you'll notice that, and you have these slides so you can always go back and reference this on your own time. But you'll notice that this came up over and over again in different standards. So this popped up in indicator 1.3, so that's standard 1. It popped up in standard 4, indicator 7, and in standard 6, indicator 7. So whenever there was a question that was asking you to rate yourself on how you're doing on monitoring strategic goals in your meetings, every time you consistently said, yeah, that's an area we could improve in a little bit. So for me anyway, that's a really good sign that we saw that consistency in your evaluations. And we already talked about how you're doing that, and Superintendent Enfield and President Smith addressed that. So there's already work being done on that. My recommendation is to stay the course in the work that you're doing to keep the agenda items focused, which you've already said that is the plan, that's the intentional plan. Continue to ensure that the reports, this is something that the superintendent, that's their area, that's their role. To ensure that those reports continue also to remain focused on that. So go ahead.
Thank you. I just want to make sure I'm understanding accountability properly. That is related to student success, performance, strategic goals, implementation, how we move forward in making all that happen?
Yeah, primarily it can be summed up right there in the bold. I mean, it is you focusing in majority of your meeting time on monitoring your strategic goals that you have set, specifically those that are more directly impacting student learning. Yeah.
Thank you, President Smith. So, Dr. Ellsbury, at our last meeting, the trustees approved our strategic plan, and the team and I are going to be finalizing in the coming weeks the metrics and the strategies that we're going to use to meet the goals that we've set. I think it's important to point out that the trustees determine the what, which they did in the strategic plan. I determine the how. Mm-hmm. My team and I have to figure out. So you've said, okay, we agree to this plan. This is what we want for our kids in our community. Okay, superintendent and team, go forth and figure out how to do it. I do, though, when you talk about using time to focus on the goals, that's monthly updates on these goals isn't really realistic. So what I'm proposing moving forward is that we do a mid-year, end-of-year strategic plan check-in. That said, when we have our school presentations, we will actually structure those presentations so that they're aligned to the strategic plan goals, so that you'll be able to actually see the strategic plan in action in the work that our schools are doing. So I just wanted to, that's the plan at this point. Obviously, can be reviewed and amended in either way, but that's our thinking to date. And that we will continue focusing also some of our time on actual achievement metrics too, as related to the plan. So.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's exactly what I would recommend. And you're right, it can't be done. You can't do it every board meeting. So in your own policy in 9110-4A, it indicates that there'll be an annual schedule of topics on the board agenda that will allow this. But that means you bring the information when you have the information, which is a great plan that Superintendent Enfield and she's already working on this. So this is really good news, all right? Sometimes this is not the case. Sometimes I'm working on the side. I'm kind of needing to work on the side with superintendents who then, after an evaluation like today, they'll actually say, can you come and meet with me because I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know how to do this. Because sometimes we're seeing reports that are really into operations and management detail and not focused on the broad picture that the board is supposed to be mostly focused on. But you already have that in hand.
Yeah, and I think I just want to share with the trustees too is that we are going to continue for the coming year to work with MUTU on execution of the plan, because that first year of implementation is critical. We have to get it right for the subsequent years. So we're going to be very disciplined and intentional in how we begin implementing and monitoring the plan. I just wanted the trustees to
Thank you. I'm getting into the weeds here a little bit, and for the right reasons, we tend to concentrate on some consent agenda items. Sometimes we don't bring any forward, we just approve them as a set, and sometimes we go through several. Can you share what you found out about practice with that?
Yeah, and I'm gonna, if I can, I'm gonna flip a few slides because we're almost to the point I was gonna discuss, and it's to your question, Trustee Nicollet. So you sort of set me up beautifully, so thank you. You rated yourself as needing to work on trustee dialogue and collaboration, that you had concerns about how you were dialoguing and collaborating with each other. I've already shared with you what we saw. And here are my recommendations again. These are the same as from our observations. They're no different. But some of the things that, in addition to what I've already shared with you, is, so speak for yourself, don't speak for individuals or groups. That can be polarizing. Second thing, getting to your question, Trustee Nicollet, operations and management questions or process questions, highly effective trustees, what they do is first of all, they receive the reports, and they are faithful at reading the reports as soon as they get them, and they typically will have a number of questions. They then will bring those questions individually outside of the board meeting. Usually before the board meeting is when you need to do it, and you'll go to the superintendent, is who you should go to. Now, the superintendent might direct you to someone else to answer your question, or they might answer the question themselves, but you should always go to the superintendent. And what we find is that allows for a lot of those kinds of questions to be taken care of before you're in the meeting. So it not only makes the meeting more efficient, but it also avoids what can be kind of a perceived optics that are very, very negative. Because if you have a staff that's presenting a report and you start asking, or even, especially if it's perceived in a challenging way, where you're challenging their processes and procedures, you are, whether you believe or feel you're doing this or think you're doing this, you are. What's the perception is that you're questioning your staff and how they're doing their job. You're questioning the superintendent, who obviously reviewed this report and approved the process and the procedures as well. So you are offering a criticism. And the challenge is that most of the time, after the airtime has been burned in the meeting, most trustees realize, oh, okay, there is no problem, there is no issue here. It's being done as well as anybody can do it. Well, you could have found that out before the meeting, okay? Instead of having all of these unfortunately negative kinds of optically negative interactions during a public meeting.
And Dr. Ellsbury, just for anybody that's listening, our board does have that opportunity. So as the trustees know, and then also for the public, when the packets come out, we are generally advised to respond to JJ and Dr. Enfield no later than 12 o'clock on Monday, although you're more than welcome to email your questions beforehand. And then those questions are answered very responsively, and then no later than in one big group, all of which comes out before the meeting, and that's a really great opportunity. So we actually do follow that process here, or we try to, but we have it implemented. In case anyone was wondering or listening, like, this sounds like a great idea, we do have this process, and we do encourage trustees to follow it.
Yeah. Now, there's some times when you'll go to, as a trustee, if you're functioning really well together, which I know that's your goal, and you guys are doing well. Can I just say that too? I haven't really given you the blanket, but let me tell you, first of all, that of the boards that I've evaluated, and I've evaluated quite a few, you're functioning at a pretty high level as a board, okay, overall. So your ratings are pretty good.
Can I comment on, before we move on, since that's exactly a great question. We do have that process, and it generally works fairly okay. But I will say that in my 2.5 years on the board, the agenda comes out by law at 9:00 a.m. Thursday. I've sat by the computer at 8:55 and watched it pop up. I don't understand why it can't come out sooner if we already know what it's going to be. And then we have a life. We have other things to do. Sometimes I generally set aside Sunday to go over it and get my comments and questions in. And like the last one, I didn't get responses till 5 p.m. roughly on Monday before the meeting. And I was not by the computer at that time. So it's a good process. It's not a great process. It does have its glitches in there. And I am the one, so this is probably a good time to talk about it because I appreciate any feedback one-on-one or in a public forum or by my fellow trustees. My views often are more diverse or different than the other trustees. So I'm the one that pulls consent items. And that's the only way I can vote no. And sometimes the answers I get before answer my question, I don't pull them. Other times they not directly answer the question or not at all, and I have to pull it. Sometimes I vote yes with the group. Many times I vote no, and I respect that process. That's the democratic. When I lose, it's like that's the democratic process. And I know I'm kind of pontificating, but if there's any way to avoid that, I'm open to ideas. And then that puts me. So this gets back to your last question about use of time. I'm clearly the guy that talks a lot. And I try to make it brief, but that's the only way I can represent the views of my constituents, which might not be consistent with the other trustees. So what, public forum or private, I don't care. You're not going to hurt my feelings. Or the other trustees can weigh in one-on-one or whatever. But clearly I'm the one that talks a lot, but I try to be concise. But it's the only way I can get those views on the record and or vote no. So just put all that on the record for any comments that anybody has.
I think in what we see with, again, going back to highly effective board members understand that when they're in, if they're going to, lose a vote, and can I say it this way, they pick their battles. Sometimes strategically, it is important to a trustee to ask a question, even if they've gone before the meeting and they've asked the question, they've gotten their answer. If this is a values issue, if it's to a large group of constituents, and I would emphasize that, you don't want to be making these kinds of decisions based on a small group, because you don't represent a small group. You represent a whole bunch of people. So it really needs to be a broad concern by a broad constituency. If you feel the question should be asked for the sake of hearing the alternative viewpoint, then sometimes strategically it's not a bad thing to do. It's a good thing to do. But I would also say that you need to pick your battles very carefully. When you know that this is a small opinion, you're going to lose the vote anyway. I think you should weigh that against any potential damage that it's going to do to support in the district, or the impression that of breaking down relationship between the other trustees, unless this is a really important thing that needs to be said. And I find that I have to be honest with you that there are some, as I was viewing your meetings, there were some questions where I thought, okay, this was probably a good question to ask, a good thing to bring up to show the other viewpoint. But I also have to tell you that a lot of the questions, the vast majority, that was not our impression. In fact, as a person who's been a career teacher, principal, superintendent, as soon as the questions started coming out of the mouth, I was going, that's state law. This is a pointless question. This is law. This organization has to do this. The superintendent bylaw has to do this. That question should have been asked before the meeting. It's a clear-cut answer. Now, you may not like the answer, but it's pointless to bring it up. And oftentimes it was delving into operations and management and the minutia of procedure, which doesn't, that is not what should be happening in a board meeting. That's something that should be a conversation on the side. So if you got some constituents that any trustee is representing that's saying, I don't like the way they run the whatever program, that should be a redirection so that they can sit down with school officials through the superintendent and hopefully come to a resolution. Hopefully even improve the district. I mean, any good administrator worth their salt is not going to oppose that kind of a conversation. They want to know if their programs aren't going well for constituents. So they want to hear those concerns, and if they can, I know they want to resolve those concerns. But that should be happening on the side. It shouldn't really require the pulling of lots of the consent agenda items. That should be a more rare case, and only when it's a real ideological issue. I can tell you that boards that are really functioning at high levels, they actually will plan that together. I know of presidents and superintendents, and maybe a trustee will come and say, man, a lot of my constituents are saying this, and even though they may know that there's a sense that the vote's going to go one way or the other way, they will actually encourage, they'll say, you know, go ahead, you should go ahead and ask that question, because I know that we're about 50-50 split in our community, or 60-40 or something. There's a lot of people that have concerns about that. So you should go ahead and ask that question, even though we kind of know what the answer is going to be. They actually strategically plan to do that. So there again, then what happens is the other voices are heard, but you're not breaking faith with each other as far as your teamwork. And that's the sweet spot that you want to get to. Okay. Right. I'm going to stop there. The other thing I do want to mention one other thing, and I would say try to be really self-reflective and honest about this tactic that is called covert advocacy. And I didn't come up with it. This is a term, it's a process that's used in courts of law when discussion is going on, and it's to be avoided. It's kind of an underhanded, unethical approach to question asking. And what covert advocacy is basically defined as a question that is asked that is pretending to be an innocent inquiry, but it's actually intended to make a criticism of the system. So it's, you know, there's an old-fashioned one, which I'm not going to say because I think it's politically incorrect now, but it's, when did you get out of jail again? You know, it's that kind of a thing. I'm just asking an innocent question. When did you stop breaking the law? I'm just asking. No, I'm not. What I'm doing is I'm taking a pot shot at the district. I'm taking a pot shot at a program, at the staff, because, you know, quite frankly, I know the vote's not going to go my way, but I'm going to make this statement. And it's not a statement that helps the district. It doesn't even help the district resolve that problem. In fact, it does the opposite, because when you engage in covert advocacy, where you're basically taking these shots at people in the guise of an innocent, quote unquote, question, you're separating yourself from the rest of the board, and there's a much lower chance that the voices of your constituents are going to be heard. So if you're acting in good faith to your constituency group, even a constituency group that has let's say a minority view of something, you're better off to have a positive relationship with your fellow trustees so that you can honestly bring that concern to the board rather than bringing it in this covert manner. So that's a goal to work toward too as a board, to be okay with bringing things up in a way that's not really designed to attack or be critical of other people. Because you guys know that. I mean, just if you think about it, you catch more flies with honey than vinegar. I mean, it's just stuff we learned in kindergarten. You can't punch somebody in the mouth and then expect, I just wanted to get your attention so we could have this meaningful conversation and maybe you'll understand my viewpoint. Nobody's going to talk to you after you punch them in the mouth, okay? They're just going to say no, 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 like with their hands over their ears. We're leaders on a board. We have to be wise enough to understand the dynamics of human relationship and human communication and know that that's going to get us nowhere. And it's going to, in the end, harm the district. And we shouldn't be on the board if we're here to harm the district. We should be on the board if we're here to help the district. Right? Even if it's in terrible shape. Even if we assume that everything's bad and there's a lot of fixing that needs to be done, you don't fix it that way. Yeah. Okay. All right. Okay.
President, I'm sorry, Mr. Ellsbury. I just wanted to follow up. I had a question. I was just waiting for a pause. Is it going back to the issue of the public consent agenda? I'm sorry, the consent agenda. I wanted to hear from you what your thought is, because sometimes I've seen this in different meetings, whether it's school district, county commission, city council, where individuals create a standard for consent agendas. If at any time that there's peanut butter mentioned on the consent agenda, I'm pulling it.
Yeah.
If it's going to be $500,000 or more, I'm pulling it, no matter what. I wanted to get from you, what are your thoughts when we create that type of a standard, like no matter what the issue is, if it's X, I'm pulling it?
Yeah, it's ineffective as a board member. You don't accomplish anything. And for board members who have decided to go that route, I understand it. I mean, I'm just going to talk really openly about it. The conversation that I try to have with those trustees that are doing that is that, are you really trying to further the interests of your constituency? Because by doing it that way, you're not. You're just polarizing and tearing down. You're not building and improving. And so use a different tactic. And again, I think the most effective tactic is to take, if you have really strong viewpoint or you have a group that has really strong viewpoints that does not feel they're being heard, is to try to work through the system outside of the meeting with the superintendent, work through the process, do it that way. And then also, I'll just reiterate, pick and choose your battles. Don't every single time be pulling everything off the consent agenda, or every time this word comes up, you pull it off the consent agenda. The boy who cried wolf is real. And people will stop listening to you. And more importantly, they'll stop listening to your constituents' voice, who you're supposed to be bringing. You're supposed to be trying to compel the rest of the board to hear those constituents. And when you cry wolf over and over and over again, people just stop listening. Not just fellow board members, but the public stops listening. And you've caused that by sort of engaging in that sort of process. So being strategic about when you bring things up, when it's important to bring a point up, after you've already tried to work through the process and failed, I think is legitimate. Because otherwise, we don't want to go down, again, it's all about balance. We don't want to go down the road of the minority voice would never be heard if I told you that, right? But I think it first has to go through that process and then pick and choose what you bring up. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
If I can comment briefly. I'm guilty of that, and I'll take it to heart. $1 million has been my kind of consent agenda that I didn't think it was routine. But obviously I'm going to vote no, I'm going to pull it. But you've made a good point, and I will take that to heart. I kind of felt if it's $1 million, the citizens, it takes 5 minutes to hear it. But that said, you're right, it can be repetitious, so I will definitely take that to heart.
Yeah, great. All right, so let's move on because we're going to be out of time. I made a commitment on our agenda that we would be done with the whole evaluation process review by 10:30, and we will be. Okay. So you also mentioned an area to improve would be the trustee self-evaluation and improvement. I found this somewhat ironic since that's what you're doing right now. But there you go. So you felt this was important to do, so good. I'm glad you're doing it, and my recommendation is keep doing it, okay? Keep doing annual evaluations and try to take to heart the findings from those. The next area that you said we should improve on, you should improve on, is the superintendent evaluation, which you're also doing already. So good job. Keep doing it, all right? And we will. We're going to do that today, actually, with the rest of our time. The next one that you addressed consistently was this area that I call cultural responsiveness. So my recommendations is to continue, first of all, since you kind of consistently rated yourself as with lower marks on this, I would put this up as a conversation that you want to continue to have as a board. Here's a few ideas that I've seen boards that are effective use. The first one is back to those board reports. And I think I've already heard you discuss this, by the way, and you may want to comment on this, Superintendent, but number one is to, in the reports, go ahead and present disaggregated student results to the board.
Thank you, Thank you, Dr. Ellsbury. I just want to say that the team and I are talking, and I think that the leadership team, we need to do a better job too around disaggregated data. And so just know that that's a goal for us as it is for you, and we're going to do a much better job of breaking down the data. I also want to say that I have shared with Joe Ernst and his team, and they're working on it, that our school performance plans, which are essentially our individual schools improvement plans, which will be aligned to the district strategic plan, that there needs to be a cover sheet on those plans that sort of lays out their disaggregated data, because I think that needs to be front and center. And the other thing, because I think Dr. Ellsbury brought up a good point, when we talk about specific groups of students, if a family doesn't see their child in that group, they might feel excluded.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I want to bring us back to why we have our WCSD promise, to know every student by name, strength, and need. That's every student. And to that end, I believe that we have an obligation to make sure that every family member sees their child in the work of the district. So I have asked Joe Ernst and his team to do away with the N issue. And what I mean by that is when there is a particular student group where the N is below 10, typically NDE and others don't make us report on that, so we don't include it. How would you feel if that were your kid? My kid doesn't show up in the data because there aren't enough who look like him? Not okay. Not okay. So my goal will continue to be no invisible children in the Washoe County School District, and that will bear out. So I'm just saying that we will be able to help the trustees with this because we are focusing on this intently as a leadership team.
That's great. Thank you. That's fantastic. And this is when I mentioned this recommendation of kind of guidelines from the superintendent on those reports. That's a perfect example of them. Because when you don't have that, you know, one report will come and it'll have that data, and then the next report won't have the data because there's no kind of guideline to what should and shouldn't be in those reports. So that's great work by your superintendent. Some districts have gone to, again, this would just be a point of conversation, I would say, for the board, potentially. They have talked about a process to evaluate their policies and programs in the arena of cultural equity. So there's some districts have gone to sort of a checklist that they will go through for each of their programs and things, and that's reported. It's included in the reports that go to the board, so you can see that that's been done.
I will just add for the trustees that in putting together our strategic plan, we did reference the board's equity policy, and I believe that it hasn't been revisited or revised in a few years. And I think that those policies in particular are worthy of ongoing attention. So we would be maybe suggesting that the board want to look at that in view of these recommendations and the new strategic plan and promise.
Yeah, that's perfect.
And I'll just add that based on this feedback, the board and the public will start to see changes because, again, once we know better, we do better. So, we'll be building on this as a group going forward as well.
Mm-hmm. Great. And the other very specific area that we saw in this cultural responsiveness rating that you all did was a continued interest really by the whole board to continue to monitor student climate and safety data and to be responsive to that. And so, again, you're in agreement, all of you, that that's a really important thing to continue to be doing. Yeah, so. Okay. Individual trustee practice. So there was another survey that you took, and it's where you rated yourself. How do I think I'm doing on 10 highly effective board practices? And you also rated each other on those as well. Your strengths, where you gave yourself as a broad group really high marks, were in these 3 areas, which basically has to do with that you do feel as a group overwhelmingly that you should work as a collective team, not be engaging in a way that's really the exercise of individual power. So you feel pretty strongly about that's not an effective approach, using individual authority and power. Where you felt that there was some improvement that was needed was in role orientation and advocacy focus. Now, to remind you what those are, role orientation is the continuum between trustee and delegate. So trustee is the being interested in general interest, in broad interest, engaging in open dialogue, and the team building aspect. The delegate role is when you're engaging in advocacy work for the public, community outside of the boardroom. And so we want a balance in that kind of an approach. And so you felt that you needed a little bit of work in that arena in terms of that balance between being general interest and being an advocate for certain particular programs. So the advocacy focus is the one I talked about earlier, so I won't say a lot about it, but it's the interest, trying to focus on interest rather than positionalizing things. So you all, and this is the part that, again, I thought was really good, and that's what I shared with you before was from what we saw, and you gave yourself the same rating. The area that needed help, you rated yourself a little lower. And my recommendations are no different than the previous ones that I gave from our observations, and that is that the best way to continue to have interest rather than positionalizing is all of the recommendations I've already given today, so I won't belabor that unless you have additional questions on that. There was one anomaly, and that came in practice number 5, solution-oriented. So generally, we find that high-performing boards focus on local contextual solutions to issues, to student problems, local contextual design programs as well, rather than the sort of latest craze that is sweeping the country rather than jumping on that. I saw an anomaly, and I'm just going to, just for sake of time, in my individual one-on-one conversations with all of you, I feel that there was I'll take the blame, it's my survey tool, did not explain this particular item well enough, because once we talked about it some more, you all said, oh, well, I would change my rating. That's not what I thought that meant. So I think when we talk about standardized, that's generally considered a good thing. You know, we want our curriculum to be consistent across grades, across schools, et cetera. And we have come to view that as a standardized approach. Standardized tests aren't necessarily a bad thing either, so that's generally thought of as good. So I think the term standardized threw a lot of board members in terms of what they thought I was talking about. So once we explain, this is where we support as a board programs and processes that address our local issues and needs. That's what we do. If that happens to be a nationally popular program, great. All the better, because it's been proven. There's nothing bad about that. But what we don't want to do, we don't see highly effective boards just bringing programs in because they're popular nationally, even though there's no connection to our local need at all. We're just doing it as a flag. See, we're doing it too, kind of a remark. That's a bad reason to bring a program in, okay? And that's really what this was about, so. There's one other thing, and I'm going to wrap it up with this. This is the last part, is what I call spread, and these are parts of. Hey, Trustee Mayberry, I'll pause and let, if you want to welcome Trustee Mayberry.
I would like to formally welcome Trustee Mayberry to the meeting.
Welcome, Trustee.
Welcome, Trustee.
So to kind of help you all out, I went through and looked, and these would be areas where your ratings were so different from each other and diverse that I think these things might be worth some more conversation, because clearly if some of you think on it, you read an indicator and you say, we are superstars at this, and then a couple of others of you say, we are horrible at this, and then others, trustees, are sort of in the middle somewhere. It's like you're all over the place. There's no shared understanding or perception of where you are with an area. It might be worth a little conversation to try to figure out why there's such a spread. My gut is, and my experience is, that probably it's a misunderstanding, again, of that indicator. So when you read it, it means one thing to one trustee and it means something else to another trustee. So just a little conversation around that would probably resolve that kind of spread. But I think it's always good to look at those. And so I've laid them out for you. They're right here. And again, it wasn't my intention for us to go through these, because this would be a separate, would need separate time and a focused conversation on it. But the first one, I'll just go very quickly. The first standard, 1.7, had really a big spread, again, of ratings. And that had to do with your focus on excellence, student excellence in your vision and planning process. 2.2, so again, it ranged everywhere from we're great at that to we're terrible at that, and there didn't seem to be a real agreement across. Standard 2.2 was, is vision determined collaboratively with voices from all members of the community? That was that one. Seemed to be a real broad rating on how we're doing with that. The next one, 3.9, is, do the trustees, are they knowledgeable about their programs, and are they knowledgeable about their role in terms of those support of those programs? There was a really broad there. The next one, 7.5, was an indicator about, do we focus and support a safe and positive climate, and are we monitoring that? Again, there's a spread on that, big spread. Standard 11.6 board members speaking individually rather than collectively. And we've talked a lot about that today already, but there was a big spread on how you thought you were doing with that. And then finally, 11.9 is an interesting one. And that was one that said that the board and the superintendent learn together. Okay. Yeah, I don't know what to do with that one. Generally, you do learn together. You have in-services, you have board meetings together, but for some reason there was a huge spread of ratings on that. And so again, it just made me interested. That might be a 5-minute conversation, but I just wondered why did we have everything from we're great to we're terrible at that? I'm not sure.
I'll admit that this was one of the ones that through talking, I understood the question more. I was one of the people that fell into that group where once I understood it more, I had a slightly different opinion than how I had rated it. But these are all really good things.
Great. And that's it for my kind of overview and my recommendations for your evaluation. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Alsbury. Does anyone have any comments or thoughts? I mean, I want to say thank you. Here's what I'm going to commit right now. I'm going to come back to this. When I feel that things are getting fritzy or I need some orientation, I am going to commit this presentation to my loop and come back to it because this was incredibly germane to where we are as a board and a lot of the things that we're focused on after adopting a new strategic plan, having our new superintendent. There's a time of great change. And so I found this to be very insightful, and it will absolutely help make me a better trustee, the best president that I can be, and then, of course, in service to all of our kids and staff. Any other thoughts from anyone else on the board? Trustee Westlake.
Thank you, President Smith. I just want to say thank you, and I cannot believe how much work and effort you put into this, and thank you very much, because I think it's going to help myself and the board as a whole, so thank you so much.
Great, you're welcome.
Thank you, Madam President. This was very insightful, especially when we had our one-on-one. Did make me think some things. So I've been very conscientious. So just want to tell you thank you. Appreciate
Thanks.
it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President. I want to echo everyone. Thank you for the work. I mean, I bet it's entertaining watching some of these. And I do want to say, I do feel like my tenure on this board, I do feel, even from the previous presidency and administration, that I do feel, for the most part, that our board tries to show united front. Mm-hmm. Even when it comes to like policies and things like that, like the wordsmithing, I feel like I do believe that we try to accommodate. And I don't want any trustee to feel like they have to lose or focus on their constituents. So I guess just for the public, can you kind of maybe give a little more example on how we as a board can be inclusive and open to everyone on this board?
Yeah, I think it kind of goes back to, for me, it goes back to really trying to, in your own mind, solidifying this, that's okay. That happens. Solidifying this difference between taking a position and taking an interest. I think that's really it. We got to respect the fact that there's folks that do not agree with us. There's constituents that do not agree with the majority viewpoint. We got to understand that if we happen to find ourselves in the minority viewpoint, we would certainly want to be respected and be heard. At the same time, if you're in the minority viewpoint, there's a balance there too, in understanding that most of the constituents and most others are not agreeing with you, and therefore we have to work again, together as a team, be respectful, but then there's that balance. I mean, it just comes back to the balance, and not over dominating, not trying to get those views expressed in a way that's actually going to be productive and helpful to your constituents, which may mean that you're working behind the scenes outside of the board meeting more, to try to meet those individual needs that are very specific and special, because they're not going to be resolved in a board meeting anyway. This is a business meeting, right? And so to help your constituents, be thinking of those kinds of tactics. There's not just one way to do things as a board member. Yeah.
And I want to thank you for that. I know when I was a brand new trustee, and I think I'm still developing, obviously, but I know I had to change my mindset. And I know when I called on one-on-one, I do appreciate some of the insight. You showed me some things, and it's not just District C is not just my constituents. Washoe County is my constituents. All students, all staff, all parents. So I do appreciate that, and I hope all of us see it that way.
Yeah.
So, thank you.
Thank you. Absolutely. I just want to, it's going to sound like an excuse, but these are facts. I think some of our shared understanding, we're continuing to build. I don't want, even for myself, to lose sight that we are kind of changing back after going through this thing that we all went through together as a nation, as a world. And we're still figuring out what that means. We also have hired a fabulous new superintendent. We have some political climate that we're still trying to figure out. We just went through a legislative session that has a lot of ramifications. We just, as a group, went through a very intense, important, and successful budget planning. And so we have this shared understanding we're still building, and as it should be. And I don't know for myself if I ever feel I can truly get there, because education by nature, there's always something new and fabulous to work on. Yeah. And thank you, though, for bringing all this to the forefront, because I have no doubt in my mind that we will continue to work on this, because when we get up in the morning, it's really not about us. It's about all the things that you mentioned. And so thank you for this. Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much. That's a beautiful way to conclude this item. So thank you so much, Dr. Alsbury. We really appreciate you. Got so much from this, and so much from all of the individual sessions that we had with you. All right, so on that note, that closes item 2.01, and we are going to go ahead and take a break. So let's take a break and reconvene at 10:50 a.m. Thank you.
So the crickets and Elko made CNN this morning. It is gross.
Those crickets are crazy.
The Mormon crickets.
They are so nasty.
I mean, just watching it, you kind of get the creepy crawling.
I'm not buds, but
Welcome to Nevada, exactly.
They're super dangerous because when you run them over, they create like an oil slick.
That's what someone said in the slide, yeah. Ugh. I'll stay in Reno. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Well, sometimes North Valley's like
Yeah, they get it.
right?
Yeah.
Yucky, yucky.
All right, it's 10:52, and I will call this meeting back to order. We're going to continue on to item 2.02. This is the presentation, discussion, and possible action to determine the goals based on the approved strategic plan metrics for Dr. Susan Enfield for the 2023-2024 school year for her evaluation over that time. This is part of the contractual requirements that we have with her, and our presenter is Dr. Thomas Ellsbury. Dr. Ellsbury, I know you're going to kick us off, but I did want to share one thing really quick, and I know you're going to go over it for the evaluation timeline. Something I do want to share with the board and the public is that we're doing this process for the upcoming school year, which really starts July 1. At this point in the year, this is a one-time thing. We were changing over our strategic plan. Dr. Enfield joined us. What you'll see in the future as Dr. Ellsbury presents to us is that moving forward, goal setting for the upcoming school year will be done in February, which is really where it should be. This was just a one-time situation based on a confluence of factors, and we're making it work. But we do want the public to know that we already have a plan in place and already have meetings scheduled to get on a more traditional path so that everyone can achieve their success with these goals. Thank you, Dr. Ellsbury.
Great, that was very helpful, and thank you for going over that. So we are moving on to a new packet, so if you would, go try to find the meeting materials that is labeled 2.02. So grab that one. So it says 2.02. Yeah. All right, so we want to really, our goal kind of for this section, the big goal is for us to come to agreement, for you to come to agreement as a board on the performance indicators that are going to be the focus areas for Dr. Enfield. Now, you have a strategic goals, and there are many of them. I've looked at your new strategic goals and evaluated them in depth. There are quite a few goals, which is normal, and no superintendent evaluation is going to be able to focus on every single one of those indicators and goals. And so we really need you as a board to collectively narrow that down. My recommendation is no more than 8 indicators, performance indicators that you are focusing on for the 2023-2024 year. And so that's our task, okay, for this section of our meeting today. And I'll share with you how we're going to try to do that, okay? So the first thing is just a review of the timeline. So again, we're talking 2023, 2024. The process criteria for evaluation and indeed a superintendent evaluation handbook with the process delineated was approved by this board in our October meeting in 2022. And so that is continuing. So just a reminder that that step really has happened already. the decision, as I just mentioned, of what indicators will you focus your evaluation for next year on is what we're going to try to do today. The rest of the dates, if you'll just glance at those, are up on the screen. So again, this is a transitional plan. It's not where you will eventually be. The following year, we'll be back to a more traditional evaluation timeline, but this is, again, a step forward. And so you'll notice the mid-year performance in January, a review of progress in August of 2024, then the process of creating a final superintendent evaluation report will start in September of 2024, and then we'll conclude. That is, the goal is to be completely finished, and at the October 24th board meeting, you will be presenting that superintendent evaluation to the public. So that's the idea. Okay. All right, just kind of a reference for everybody. Now, when we look at the superintendent handbook that you approved previously, there is information in that handbook, and the handbook, I will confess, I made an error. I confirmed my error with JJ this morning. But if you will go to the materials on 2.03, on the very back, there's a section that says Balanced Governance Superintendent Evaluation Handbook. I should have included that in the 2.02 materials. That's the more appropriate place for it. But if you look through this document, which again you approved last year in October, you'll find some language in the handbook. This is the guide to how you're going to go about the superintendent evaluation process. And it's fairly detailed, but I would just point to the first pages. There's some writing about what the focus of a superintendent evaluation should be in general. And that's what I've included on the slide here. And I don't think we need to go through and reread that or anything, but you can look at it yourself to confirm if you'd like. But the first thing, there's a point that's made in that language of the handbook that we've approved already that talks about the evaluation needing to focus on growth and consultancy. And so certainly your selection of the indicator should keep that in mind, that your primary goal is for you to achieve growth specifically in your goals, in your strategic goals and moving forward. The second thing is just a reminder that an evaluation should be one of what I term as consultancy, and that is that less of a critique for just the sake of criticism or honestly even praise, and really responses from the trustees that will help the superintendent and vis-a-vis the district to make improvements, to grow. So we want to keep our comments, our suggestions focused on here's how we can improve, here's the direction that we want to move, and have those be things that are manageable and doable and productive moving forward, right? The second thing, just a reminder in the selection of the indicators, is that in our study of the superintendency, there is there's a number of years when you have a newer superintendent to your district. Now, Superintendent Enfield is very experienced in her previous work, but because she's new to your district, we always recommend that the focus should be on what we call formative metrics. And so even though your strategic goal will oftentimes have summative evaluative metrics, where, say, we want to I'll give you an example. We want to improve the math program by this percentage or whatever. We find that particularly in the initial years of the superintendency at a district, it's actually more effective for the superintendent to focus on the development of the culture of that district that's going to lead to those outcomes. Does that make sense? Rather than chasing after those outcomes. The outcomes are outcomes of a system that the superintendent has helped to improve, if that makes sense. Does that make sense? Yeah. So we don't ever want to chase after the outcome. We want to really push on the process to get those outcomes, right? Now, the great news, because this, by the way, this is part of, if you looked at one of these superintendent evaluation manuals that I was presenting 10 years ago, you would have seen the same thing being written. Interesting, your strategic plan that you just adopted, whoever you've worked with, I think is in great agreement with balanced governance, because they included, and I often don't see this, they actually included not only these summative goals, but they included these formative goals. And they were named in your document pillars, pillar A, B, C, and D, and then also 2 additional items labeled BEAM, B-E-A-M. So frequently that's missing from a strategic set of goals, and yet that is where the superintendent really needs to put their major focus, and that should be their evaluation focus. So that's the direction that I'm going to ask you to take in your selection of indicators. That is that I'm going to ask that you focus on, that's not happening yet. I'm going to, there's only one slide to this, by the way, and now we're going to get to work. So we're going to focus on those. So the evaluation needs to be the development of this district and the culture of the district to achieve those outcomes. And so that means that the focus necessarily needs to be on the pillars and on the BEAM indicators. So if you will turn to your first page, we're going to get to work, and I'll stop talking about it and we'll do it. The back of the first page of the workshop materials 2.02 is a list of the possible recommended superintendent indicators for this new upcoming 23-24 evaluation. Now, and I've interacted, as I always do, with Superintendent Enfield, so that this is not a surprise to her, just so everybody knows that. Okay, I'm not just springing something that she's not aware of nor supportive of. So it turns out that in your strategic plan, there are 14 of these indicators. And I just mentioned we don't want there to be more than 8 of these as objects of focus for this evaluation. Okay, 14 is too many. And so our goal between now and lunch is to select 8 of these. So what I'd like you to do, here's the process that I'm hoping will work for us. I want you to first take a few minutes and read through these, remind yourself of these indicators. And so each of the pillars, there's 3 indicators, and then BEAM has 2 indicators. So read through, once again, those 14 indicators. Then I want to give an opportunity for each of the trustees to select one of those indicators that you think are really important to you that should be included as one of the 8 items that are evaluated, okay? And then there's going to be an opportunity for you to select some indicators. I'll tell you how we're going to do that in a minute. and then we'll narrow it down to the 8, okay? Fair enough?
And thank you, Dr. Ellsbury. So just so everyone knows, there was a great deal of work that went into being in this place right now. And what Dr. Ellsbury pointed out around the uniqueness in terms of the alignment with our new strategic plan and this process is not by accident. It was another one of the reasons why we had to wait for that strategic plan to be done before we could do this part in the process. And now that I am even more educated on this, because many of us have not been through this process, whether that's a new strategic plan or the alignment of the goals, it's been very, very eye-opening. And so I really appreciate your support. And Dr. Enfield has also played a part in selecting these, so we can feel confident that everything that we're looking at now are things that the superintendent and her team feel are achievable and in alignment. So this is something that Susan has been a part of up until this point. And I just wanted to, emphasize what Dr. Ellsbury said around the strategic plan and the really nice alignment with choosing the goals for next year. So thank you.
Great. All right. So I'm going to open it up and...
If I might?
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I'm confused. So we're looking at, so I'll be the first one to admit I'm confused. I'll take the hit. So we're looking at meeting item 2.02, and the pillars are these that are listed.
Back of the first page.
Back of?
It's just right,
Back of the first
back of
page.
the very first page.
Okay. I got it. Got it. I'll withdraw my confusion.
No problem. That was easy. That was an easy fix. No worries. Good.
No, just going to clarify, right now we're limited to this page.
Yes.
Right, okay, thank you.
All right, so take a few minutes, look through these, and then just thought it would be helpful to hear from each of the trustees on one of the items. You probably have more than one, I'm sure, but we'll get to that. We'll get to that. We thought it would be helpful to hear from you first, and then we'll do the kind of rank them or circle them. So, President Smith, do you want to control this, or do you want me to control this part of it?
You know what? I'm learning right along with you. I mean, I'll
Okay.
keep the bumpers on the bowling lane, but I'm going to let you throw the ball.
Okay. All right. Then, Trustee Westlake.
Thank you. So we're making comments on these measures.
Yes.
Okay, I would like to comment on the expanded opportunities for parents, guardians, and family members to be involved with their child's school. That's in Pillar B, number 3. Every school that I visited these past few months, the absenteeism is lower, and the environment seems to be much healthier when the staff at the school has reached out to parents and the community and has grandparents volunteering in the school. They do coffee chats once a month. It's just seems that the school is in a much better place with that occurring. So I just wanted to throw my 2 cents in.
Thank you very much. That's perfect. It's exactly what I was hoping for. So when these items, if one of these jumps out at you, share with us.
I'm ready. Thank you.
Trustee Nicolette.
Thank you. Pillar A, Indicator 1, 100% of students learn with high quality, developmentally appropriate, and standards-aligned curriculum. That's a heavy lift. It's an important lift. And what's very important in there to me is that there's quality, it's appropriate, it meets the individual student needs, and it's aligned with their future learning.
Great, thank you. Pillar A, number 1. Okay, Trustee Mayberry.
Yeah, Dr. Ellsbury, so as I look through these indicators, and thank you for making it easy, by the way, or easier. The only hesitancy I have at the moment is, are these at some point supposed to be measurable? And how, and at what point do we identify the metrics?
There is, and let me just kind of point that out. There'll be opportunity if you have some input on this, but for today it wasn't our goal. But there have been measurable indicators developed. It's on this document right here, and all of the items that are listed under each one of these indicators are possible data points for measuring these. Now, the reason that I was reluctant to just throw this out right at the first is that we need to narrow these down to 8. It didn't make sense to look at measurable data for all 14 when we were not going to be measuring all 14. So we're going to first take the step of narrowing it down to the 8 indicators, and then you can reference back to the types of data that'll be used. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Thank you, Ms. Ellsbury.
Yeah, Trustee Woodland.
So I will follow up on our Vice President, Nicolette, because when I first was reading it and I saw number 1, I thought this is too easy. It's number 1. And I went through all the other 14, and I still came back to number 1 for the same reasons that Diane expressed. I think it's very important, and I'm very dedicated to having standards. So that's an important one for me. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you. Trustee Church?
Thank you. I agree with Dr. Nicolette. Basically, Pillar A to me is quality education. That's, I think, a no-brainer. That's just absolutely got to be number 1. The question is how. And I definitely agree with Trustee Westlake that we need an increased, well, we have a good thing, but we need to increase business partnerships, community partnerships, to the point that I even suggested at one time to the superintendent having one point of contact that coordinates that kind of thing. All that said, and I think this is no surprise, I'm big on safety. And had you asked us a year ago about safety, we are thinking of the external threat and social and emotional learning, et cetera. That has changed 100% in my mind, at least. We've had teachers come saying they're resigning because of the threats from students. In other words, the in-house. So I want to emphasize safety, the last item, but clearly I want to emphasize the in-house, the teachers, the fights, the police officers that have been assaulted, the teachers that have been assaulted with staff. So it's not the external threat, it's not social emotional, it's the actual safety of the staff and teachers and students.
So BEAM, this would be the BEAM item indicator number 2.
You could do 1 or 2, but I just want to emphasize, and again, the fact that we set these as pillars, we didn't even think about this a year ago. We didn't realize, I didn't realize, I don't think the other trustees realized how significant this was. And now it's becoming very clear.
Okay, right.
So,
thank you very much.
Physical in-house well-being.
Great, thank you. Trustee Rodriguez.
Well, thank you, sir. Looking at Pillar A, and I agree with my partners here that number 1 is important. But to have number 1, I believe you need to implement number 2 and or 3. Give teachers the time to do their lessons plans, to prep. I remember that was one thing kind of shortly after I got appointed, what I was hearing that was that teachers did not have the proper time to get their classes ready, things like that. So I would definitely, and I know with the new superintendent and our new board, we've implemented some of that, but I just want to be sure that we harness that and keep that going. And I believe that's important for all our staff, so not just our educators. And I'm there too with safety and connect. So with the BEAM as well, you can't have number 1 and 2 if you don't have kids that are, and staff that are concerned for their safety on all fronts. And I would actually, I don't know, President Smith, is this something that maybe we can look at amending as a board.
Well, thank
So-
you very much, Clerk Rodriguez. Indeed it is. And as a matter of fact, just to kind of layer right on that, if we like that one, and Dr. Enfield was just saying the same thing, indicator 1 and 2 don't have to be separate indicators. It could be all students and staff, and then we turn it into one.
Yeah, I mean, and I would even, not just there, but also our visitors. We have parents, we have outside people that come and visit our schools and property, so I would like to open it to everyone. Yeah. So I'd like to leave that out there for my fellow trustees.
So thank you, President Smith. Trustee Rodriguez, I think that gets to our schools being welcoming places, but this is really talking, we aren't going to provide supports, though, for the social, emotional, and physical well-being of visitors. I just want to make that distinction. So we can make sure our schools are welcoming places, but we're actually talking about putting measures in place that our students and staff have the supports they need for that. I don't think we can provide that to visitors and volunteers in the same way. So I just want to put that out there.
But absolutely, if there's some consensus around that, 1 and 2 don't have to be separate and discrete. We have the ability, and it sounds like Dr. Enfield is in agreement, that we can meld those together and turn those into one that covers both staff and students.
That's the BEAM, safety and connection section. Yeah.
Yes, is that correct, Clerk Rodriguez?
Is that right?
Okay, great idea.
Great.
Thank you, President Smith. The other one that I kind of targeted on was in Pillar C, commitment to elevating educators. Number 3, I think it's really important. We're only as strong as our foundation and the individuals we have on the front line. So I think that is super important, that our staff has the ongoing support and resources to strengthen our hiring, recruitment, and retention, because we're always going to be kind of behind and playing catch up if we can't get a really strong foundation.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for bringing that up, because I need some clarification on that one. I too agree, the premise, totally. Commitment to elevating educators. My question would be my comment would be, anyone who is with our students are considered educators. And number 3, staff receive ongoing support and resources to strengthen hiring, recruitment, and retention. I am just not sure what that means and how that would look, because it's so multi-layered with the different types of employees, the hiring, the process. Thank you.
I hear exactly what you're saying, Vice President Nicolette. I think where my head goes for number 3, and I agree that it's critically important, is our HR assessment and the steps we're going to take to operationalize those improvements that will center on looking at our hiring, how we recruit, how we hire, but also how we retain. So I do think we can identify some very specific things that we'll be doing as an outcome of that assessment that we have.
One other thing that I'll add, and then we'll go to Clerk Rodriguez again, is in the selection of these 5 to 8, at no point are we saying the other ones won't be worked on or that they don't matter, because she is going to be doing all of this. The district will be advancing on all of these. This allows them to orient some of their prioritized actions and some of the budget that we have, but it does not mean that we're not doing the other things.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Thank you, Madam President. And it's more just 2 cents, or I don't like, for Pillar C, commitment to evaluating educators, I think Vice President Nicolette was kind of going down that road. I personally don't like that. It's not just our educators, while I obviously appreciate and value them. It's all our staff. It's our officers, it's our front desk staff, it's our clinical aides, it's our nutrition specialists. So I think it should be, my personal opinion, it should be committed to elevating all our staff.
So I'll add that this was already adopted in the strategic plan, but I had the exact same question. It was shared with me, that our teams, and as you know, we had teams working on the strategic plan, they very intentionally wanted educators and not staff because they feel that everyone who works in the district is indeed an educator to some degree. Our bus drivers serve that purpose in terms of how they interact. I mean, so I'm with you. I had that exact same instinct, but that was a very deliberate choice on the part of the people who gave their time to this work. So I just want to share that. Yeah. Yep.
Question, might that be clarified so that the reader knows that?
I think it is in the law. Sorry. I think it should be in the broader document. Yes.
And it does bring it up even in these indicators. If you notice under Pillar C, item number 1, it
Yes.
actually specifically says teachers, comma, leaders, and staff. So it does clarify it in the indicator already. Yeah.
And Trustee Nicolette here, to that point, thank you for the lovely segue. My next choice would be Pillar C, Indicator 1, because it does encompass all of our professions.
Now, I feel compelled to, wonderful, by the way, thank you, great job. I feel a bit compelled to press you on Pillar D since it incorporates the 2 areas that you rated yourselves lowest in the evaluation. We haven't hit upon one of those yet. If you remember, it was accountability and excellence were the areas where you thought, yeah, we could improve a little bit. So can I interest anyone in speaking on that one?
I will. Madam President, thank you. Yes, we'll move on to Pillar D, number 1, which states school and district teams have access to effective and relevant tools and technology to support teaching, learning, and leadership. I think this is important because we're dealing with not just the development of our kids, but also of our staff as well. So I think that's very important. And for us to make use of the technology that's available. I've been seeing a lot of contracts coming through that we've been approving that's taking advantage of technology. So I'd like to see more of that. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Yeah, Trustee Rodriguez? Oh, I'm sorry. I wasn't looking at Trustee Mayberry.
Okay. No, thank you. Yeah, so kind of piggyback on Trustee Woodley there, Pillar D. Yeah, that's a big one for sure. I suppose that you could probably select a couple of them. My eyes turn to number 3 because it's different than 1 and 2 because it talks about parents and families. You know, I often hear and see that our families and moms and dads, they don't really know how to get involved. They don't really know how to track the performance of their children or connect with the school community, and that's for a variety of reasons. So I think that's critically important, and that sort of aligns with a lot of the discussions about getting moms and dads and parents more involved. And it seems to be different. It's a bit of a departure from 1 and 2 as well, which is interesting. I don't have a real strong opinion on 1 or 2. I guess my eyes sort of look to 1. And then when we talk about beam, the safety and connection, maybe we're not there yet, but that's the beam. I'll have some comments on that too if you want to hear now, or we can wait.
No, go ahead. Yeah, I think others have spoken on that last one.
Yeah, yeah, that last one real quick. So 1 and 2 are very similar. I just wonder if we could combine them. Number 1 could read all students and staff have intentional instruction supports for their social, emotional, and physical well-being. I mean, it's just very general right now, but I think it's important. Clearly, our students are kept after in terms of their social and emotional and well-being, as our staff and teachers.
Yeah, sounds like that's it seems like there's consensus around combining those two in that way. So, yeah. Trustee Rodriguez.
I just kind of, Trustee Mayberry kind of took the wind out of my sails there. I was leaning on number 3 as well.
Okay.
And I do agree with number 1 under Pillar D. but I kind of just, I feel like emphasizing our community, our parents, and I know that there's plenty of families out there that have 2 jobs, or single family, or single parent, and if there's anything we can do to help keep them engaged or keep them up to date. I know we do have some things in place, but we can emphasize this more, and I think it goes into Pillar B, number 3 as well, just really bringing in the parents. So.
Thank you, President
right.
Smith. I'd
Great.
like to propose a merger. Hearing loud and clear the comments that the trustees have made, and I'm going to link it back to number 3 on Pillar A as well. I think school and district leaders using data and evidence to inform their strategic decision-making and engaging with parents and families around their students' progress in an ongoing way. And that leads directly to our common district growth measure. And so I believe that the iReady system, now granted this is, pre-K, it's K-8, we don't have pre-K, sorry, Dr. Dye for iReady, but K-8, so we'd have to figure something out for high school. But at least in K-8, I think iReady gives us a really unique opportunity to be more intentional in how we engage in families around their child's progress. I don't want any parent or family member to get that call in late May saying your kid's failing, right? So I think we could combine 2 and 3, and I do want to make a pitch for, while number 1 in Pillar A is incredibly important, that means nothing unless it translates into student growth.
Absolutely.
So that's really a merger of Pillar A, number 1 and 3 indicators. Am I hearing that right? No,
not a merger. I don't know that those can be merged. I'm proposing merging 2 and 3 under Pillar D. What I was doing was sharing my rationale and my thinking around this, our growth measure, and how we're going to use that as a way not just to measure our students' growth, but to engage families in understanding how their students are doing.
Okay.
So, for example, I'm proposing that we come up with, I don't know many families, and please raise your hand as parents if you do this, who commit their school performance plan to memory. Anyone? Right. So one of the things that we did in my former district that I think was very successful is we created and Michelle's going to give me the stink eye because she's sitting out there waiting, oh God, here we go, like a one or back and front family-facing description of what the school's performance plan is all about. So you're not having to go through the plan, but there's like, here's our focus for this year, and it's a template that all schools use. It's family friendly. You know exactly what's going on at your kid's school and what the focus is for the year. I think those are the kinds of things. That's just one example of how we might be able to measure that, and why I think that growth piece is so important around the excellence and accountability piece.
Gotcha. So it's kind of a It's a combination of A1 and D3.
I don't know that it's a combination. I'm proposing combining 2 and 3 under Pillar D.
Yeah.
I think we can merge those, and I was just making a pitch for the importance of number 3 under Pillar A.
Of A3. Okay.
Yeah, and so what we're going to do at some point when we get to it is we're going to use a ranking system to choose our top 1 in each of the categories and see where we fall. And when we did this back in October, this part actually worked really well. If you remember, those of us who were with us, we had a natural consensus around a core number of them. We made a motion. We took those off the board, and then we haggled and talked and built consensus around adding 1 additional one, which we could do up to 3 additional. So when we get to that point, if we have some clear consensus around some of these, we can make a motion to take those 5, and then we can have further discussion around any additional ones up to a total of 8. That way we keep that consensus and that agreement, and then we layer onto that if the board so chooses. And for the sake of this, I know JJ has the document up, just so we can be clear. So Susan, I have that indicator 2 as school and district leaders use data and evidence to inform their strategic decision making. How would you add that on so that the trustees who are interested in the adjusted one can actually see what they're possibly ranking? And JJ, I'm going to send you this, so I'm going to take the typing and I'm going to send it to you.
And I'm doing written notes as well. I would say something to the effect of school and district leaders use data and evidence to inform their strategic decision making and communicate student progress with parents and families on an ongoing basis, something to that effect. Did I make a motion?
So Dr. Ellsbury, would a thought be that since we have these indicators by numbers, this could now be a fourth option that trustees could choose from, right? Or if people are liking that, that can become an adjustable. And I'm just trying to make sure that we track these in real time. And
Yeah.
JJ, I just sent it over to you.
Yeah, so let's just, for clarity, so the additional language was added on to which one?
Pillar D, the most intact one is item 2, and then we added to that one inform their strategic decision making and communicate student progress with students and families on an ongoing basis. That was Dr. Enfield's recommendation. It effectively becomes a fourth option, should the trustees be interested in a melded option between 2 and 3.
Okay.
JJ, where this gets hard is I don't know how we would be able to pull that up. I can just reread it as we're ranking, or we can all just briefly take a note that that one really reflects both. And we can always talk through it if the decision goes in that direction.
Yeah, I was kind of contemplating the idea of going ahead with presuming that D2 and 3 were merged, if there's consensus around that, so we don't have to constantly be going back and forth on.
Yep, I'm seeing nodding heads.
Yeah, me too. So we can count that. And I think we're ready actually to. Oh, go ahead, Trustee.
Thank you. So I need some help, Superintendent. Under Pillar C, commitment to elevating educators, I heard what you said. Really, they wanted it to focus on teachers. So my question is, when I see number 1 in Pillar C, and I see 100% of teachers, leaders, staff receive timely, focused support aligned to their individual growth areas to meet the specific needs of our diverse students, does that also include, I'm just going to pick a group of professionals, bus drivers, bus mechanics? They will have a pathway to continue to grow, even though indirectly they support student growth, so that they also have a pathway. Administrative aides, nutrition workers. Thank you.
Yes, so remember, but it's a pathway not just around their growth, it's to meet the specific needs of our diverse students. That's very different than a professional pathway. I just want to make that distinction. And I will put one caveat out here too, is that this is also contingent on our budget to do some of these things. So as we don't have an adopted budget as of yet, whatever we land on, I will be very clear in putting plans together with the team and flag for the trustees early on in the school year where we will be challenged to meet some of these goals because we simply don't have the budget to provide training for all, that sort of thing. So some of these may be, I'm just putting it out there, some of these may be important but aspirational, pending budget priorities. Does that make sense?
It does, and I think within this, you mentioned the HR, the personnel survey. I know that it's very important that each area of employment has a good deep dive into understanding, do we have everyone that we need? What are our opportunities? How are we going to hire, recruit, and retain so that all of those areas are, I guess, there's attention paid to those needs. And again, I know that is indirect to student success, and yet it is a vital part of it.
I might offer, too, that should this be an area where the trustees land as a priority, that I might then go back to my team and we might identify, because all isn't realistic, right? The idea that we can do it within 1 year for every employee group. So would we want to prioritize teachers, bus drivers, paraprofessionals, you know what I mean? So the areas where we know we've had real pain points, So that might be a more realistic way to entry. Not that we're ignoring what's happening with every employee matters, but within the context of this year, and remember, this is year one of an ongoing plan, and progress will be ongoing. I don't think we're going to check boxes and say success, in a year. We're going to say progress, yay, and here's where we can do better.
I am comfortable with that. Thank you.
All right. Well, since no one's leaping to the microphone, we actually have it narrowed down with the two mergers that we discussed. It seemed like there was consensus around. We have it down to 9 indicator measures right now. These are the ones that I have that were spoken to specifically as being important. Pillar A, 1, 2, and 3. Yeah, Joe, the 2 was sort of the last one that was mentioned. Pillar B, item 3. Pillar C, indicator 1 and 3. Pillar D, indicator 1, and then 2 and 3 are merged. And then the beam, safety and connection, 1 and 2 are merged. 7, 8, 9. So that gives us 9. So I certainly do have rating forms where we could.
Could you go over A and B again?
Uh-huh. In what way, Trustee Church? Oh yeah, I'm sorry. So right now, it sounds like preference would be Pillar A, indicators 1, 2, and 3.
All individual.
Yeah, those were all 3 spoken to as being critical. Pillar B, indicator 3. Okay. Trustee Westlake.
Oh, thank you. Is there a way we could combine in A, 2, and 3? Because it's saying expanded time and supports for educators, and then in 2, it's all teachers have access to professional learning and collaboration time, which is expanded time and supports. Is there a way
I think
we can
those are
combine those
distinctly
two?
different, but Superintendent Enfield, you want to speak to that, or?
Yeah, Trustee Westlake, I hear exactly what you're saying. In some ways, I feel like number 3 is a very specific example of the professional learning and collaboration time our
right.
educators are going to need around our growth model. But you are right that our teachers need access to professional learning and collaboration in other areas as well. So I do think they're distinct in that sense, though they're very much related.
Okay.
And I will just say, I think the reason why number 3 jumps out to me as such a priority is we've made a significant investment in our iReady system, that we have great hope and optimism will be a significant shift in culture and practice in the district. So that's the reason that jumps out, because that's just top of mind for me. So.
Can I maybe my counting's off, but I have 7. Because if we have 1, 2, 3 on A, we have 3 on B, on C we have 1 and then a combined 2 and 3, and then on D we have a combined 1 and 2. Doesn't that equal 7?
I didn't have that. I had C. I didn't have anything merged on C.
Yeah.
I have 8.
Well, no, maybe Dr. Alsbury needs to say it again.
I have 9.
I'll let me go through what I have again and just double check my math too here. So pillar A, I have number 1, number 2, and number 3. Pillar B, number 3. Pillar C, number 1 and number 3. Pillar D, number 1 and then number 2 and 3 merged, and then beam 1 and 2 merged. Okay, is that?
Thank you for the record.
Okay.
Trustee Nicolette here. So I have a question about Pillar A, and I do to see the distinction between number 2 and 3. And I heard you about the iReady. I also wonder if I've got a high schooler, why is high school being left out?
It's not. We're going to have to figure out what we do to measure that for high school.
And that's a good example of we're not leaving anything behind.
Right.
We're just focusing on some supports, which in this case happens to be strengthening that K-8, and particularly with the strengths of iReady.
So to Trustee Nicolette's point, we're certainly not going to ignore high school, but remember, we're going to try to be very specific in the goals, and there is no room for error in the iReady rollout, right? We really want to get that right. So that's going to be a tremendous focus, not to the exclusion of secondary. I want to be clear on that, but that naming this, especially in this first year, is really critical.
All right. So I don't want to rush this, but let me just throw something out. You can shoot it down if you want to. My impression in terms of the sharing is that I wasn't sure if Pillar A, item number 2, there was as strong of feelings on that particular one. That gives us our 9th one. If we did not include that one, we would be at our 8, and we would be done. But I don't want to push something that's not. If you feel really strongly about A2, then we will go to the rating sheet. That's the next option, okay? To narrow it down from 9 to 8. So Trustee Rodriguez, you spoke to A2, so you should push back on me here.
I'll lean in. I hear our superintendent as far as, with iReady and K-8. When we do this publicly and we're doing an evaluation on our superintendent, I feel for the public, I hear the Vice President, like, what about our high school kids? When we're public doing an evaluation on our school, on our leadership, I just think the optics are not as positive as we would like to have them. So that's kind of why number 2 sticks out to me, because it includes all staff. And maybe outside the boardroom, we know with our superintendent, and we know iReady, we voted on those things, and we know the direction which that's heading. I just want our public to not have question, about my high school student. What about them?
Okay. Trustee Mayberry.
Yeah, it sounds like we're sort of stuck on A. I struggle with that too, and I'm just thinking out loud. Because a lot of our educators, they want extra time. They can't get it because there's not enough teachers. Sometimes the extra time isn't utilized for professional development. I like the idea of expanded time and support for professionals. It almost seems like 2 and 3 can sort of merge. I mean, this public meetings kind of present awkward opportunities for people to pontificate, so I don't want to do that. But I think we can get there. I think we're close, but I think we could flush out. We could eliminate one of those and sort of tie them together. I don't know if I'm making any sense or not.
Superintendent Enfield, do you have any thoughts on that? No? Okay. Okay.
I had on the beam, are we counting 1 and 2 separate?
No.
Okay, that's what I was missing.
We combine those, so it's going to read all students and staff.
Okay,
So, because they're pretty much the same. We could have handled them differently, but we're going to choose to layer them. Yep.
Question? So work with me on this. Pillar B3, expanded opportunities for parents, guardians, family members. Pillar D3, parents, families receive, and probably should say guardians, ongoing support. Couldn't those, so almost identical, couldn't they be consolidated and then we're done? Both of them talked about expanded opportunities, access to resources, how their kids are doing.
Yeah, Trustee Church, I hear what you're saying, and I see the connection as well. I think, however, under Pillar B, what we're talking about is families being an integral part of the school, whereas in Pillar D, we're really talking about making sure families are engaged and aware of their children's academic and social emotional progress in school. I do think those are different. Because I think that, one of the things I'm sure that you have heard that I have heard is not all of our families feel welcome in school. So what are the steps we can take to make sure that our families see themselves as an integral part of the school community? That to me is distinct from families having access to and being engaged in their children's progress.
All right. I'm going to recommend then that if this is agreeable to everybody, great conversation, by the way. Thank you, everybody. Let's go ahead and do the rating sheet. Then basically I think what we can do to make this work really smoothly is I'll give you some direction. We don't need to rate everything because we've already narrowed it down. So we'll just be doing ratings on the 9 items that we've already discussed. And then that'll allow us to narrow it down. I'll crunch the numbers over lunch, so this way you don't have to sit there and wait for that, and then I can report what we decided. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Ellsbury. I wanted to take a stab at this Pillar A, number 2, in comparison to Pillar C, number 3. Because when I read Pillar A, number 2, it states all teachers have access to professional learning and collaboration time. Pillar C, number 3, says staff receive ongoing support and resources to strengthen hiring, recruitment, and retention. And from my perspective, that seems like that's very similar.
Oh, I see. So you're suggesting lean towards Pillar C, number 3, in lieu of Pillar A, number 2.
That is correct. Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Comment? Yeah, I don't think we need to rank order. I think we got 9. We just got to get rid of 1. And I think what I'm hearing is get rid of Pillar A2, I think is what I just heard. And I agree. We don't need to rank.
This is a perfect opportunity to pause for public comment because this is an item for action.
Right.
So JJ, can we please invite public comment?
Pablo Nava Duran.
Hi, Mr. Duran. Welcome.
Hello, how are you doing? So I'm going to give you honor and review. So I know guys, great job for all of you, all 7 of you, including chapters and Westlake. Guys, great job. As Woodley, great job. All kinds of stuff. So for give you honor and review for that. So I think that we need to work on more accountability on a staff leader, and then for the student behavior, all kind of stuff, because of a state legislature that pass a new student behavior policy over here. So we want to make sure you add a new district policy for student behavior. Make sure, like, if you do mess around, you get suspended, you get kicked out of school, you get consequence for that. So and I like to give you a review for Superintendent Enfield. So you've done an amazing job. So you're not perfect. So you got work to do. And so as Joe Rodriguez, you're not perfect. So sorry. Sorry. So Pillar A is a curriculum, which is you have to follow the teacher's direction on the curriculum. I include potential instructions. Like, for example, like if a parent wants to see their child teacher curriculum, please come to open house. Please come see the teacher after school. Please come to the school, like during school, once a month or once a year, and you'll be happy about it. So not every parent attend open meeting have that. Very unfortunate because they have to work every day. That's very unfortunate. And hopefully, Pillar B is a strong community about facility, community in schools, so facility and for PA, I'm not going to talk about it. For community in school, so not just parent, but community and school as well. We need to support parents and the community as well. And for the students, number 2, committed to for education, we need to support teacher. Need to support teacher because I see many of teacher are leaving recently or maybe move to the different school because they don't want to deal with kind of student trauma or negative environments, student or learning environments. We need to support commitments on education. And D is a cultural accident and accountability. Like we need to work on accountability and cultural accident. I think there should be work on as and being a safer connection. So I got nothing else. So goodbye.
Thank you very much, Pablo.
That's all I have.
Thank you, Madam President. Just for the sake of trying to work and work as a team here, I'm just wondering, like, I'd be more than happy to back off A2 because I might be kind of alone on this one, or maybe a little bit of a minority. But what if for number 3, A3, instead of K8, could we look at expanding that to pre-K through 12? I mean, I understand what you're saying as far as I-rating stuff goes, but
we don't have a common district growth measure for high school.
Gotcha.
And that will take an investment. So we're going to have to look at ways that we do measure growth. But we don't have the same mechanism in place for secondary that we do in K8. Now, what we could add, and this might address the concern that you're both raising, is leave this expanded time for grades K8 to demonstrate and explore the development of a 9 through 12 growth measure as well, so that we're paying attention to that, figuring out what we can put in place for next year, but looking longer term, do we need to put something different in place there? So it's a little tougher in secondary, and I think I will just give an example. The state uses ACT. In my former district, we used SAT, but what we did was we gave the PSAT 8, 9 to 9th graders, we gave the PSAT to 10th graders, we gave the SAT to 11th graders, and that sort of became the growth measure to see if our students were growing towards being college and career ready on that assessment. It's not perfect, but we can certainly explore other ideas for what a 9 through 12 growth measure would be, because we need to.
So I was tracking with that, so then it would read expanded time and supports for educators to leverage a common district growth measure for grades K8 to demonstrate how much progress every student makes over the course of a school year and explore measures for 9 through 12.
And given that we have preschoolers in our district, and it's very important to have that continuum, I would have to add pre-K and 9 through 12, because we've got the K-8 covered. I don't want to leave out our littles, as they call them.
We could. I want to hear from Dr. Enfield. It is really important we don't boil the ocean, everybody, okay? Because we only have so much. Anything we choose does not mean that the other things don't happen. We only have so much budget, and we're going to hold her responsible for all this. So I completely agree with you, and maybe Dr. Enfield is good with that. We have to be super careful that these are North Stars, and it doesn't mean that there are not also stars in the sky that we're also looking at. But it's really, really important that we don't overshoot on everything, because then we're not really able to drive significant progress in some of these areas. But that's not necessarily a reflection of including pre-K. It's very easy for reviews to become scope creep. And so I just want to put that word of warning out there.
Vice President Nicolette and I are of like mind when it comes to the importance of pre-K. For me, it's less about measuring growth in pre-K versus measuring kindergarten readiness at the end of pre-K. That obviously is going to be central to our Strong Start goal. So I would say that we will address it there. I don't know that we need to call it out here. And I think you can take it to the bank that I won't renege on that. commitment.
I will get my checkbook out.
And remember, we're going to have other goals. So remember, in February of 2024, we're going to be setting our goals for the next school year. So as we grow, as the budget develops, as we do these things, other opportunities will present themselves for us to focus on, remembering that all this work is still happening in the background.
Yeah, I just echo what President Smith said. I mean, I don't think we should overwhelm the superintendent. I mean, these goals have to be attainable, realistic, and I think that we're on the right path. Thank you.
I just want to say one more thing about attainable. I agree. Why would you give yourself something that isn't attainable? And yet, what is most important to me is that it's a worthy goal and it's something that is genuine. And attainable is good. Worthy is more important to me. I'm done.
The phrase I like to use, Vice President Nicolette, is bold goals that are worthy of our students.
Yeah, Trustee Rodriguez.
If I may, with what President Smith said, as far as what could be the amended Pillar A3, I'd be more than happy to support that and
Great.
Back off of A2.
Then I think we might be able to entertain a motion without having to go through the whole rating process. It sounds like we're close. President Smith?
Yep, give me 1 sec while I just track on this.
There's a lot of merging and bonding going on.
Okay. So I've been tracking along with this, and the motion could potentially be that Dr. Enfield's adopted goals for the 2023-24 school year could be Pillar A number 1, Pillar A number 3 adjusted to expanded time and supports for educators to leverage a common district growth measure for grades K-8 to demonstrate how much progress every student makes over the course of a school year and explore measures for 9-12. Pillar B is number 3. Pillar C is 1 and 3. Pillar D is number 1 and a combined 2-3, which reads, school and district leaders use data and evidence to inform their strategic decision-making and communicate student progress with students and families on an ongoing basis. And then for the BEAM, a merged 1 and 2 that reads, all students and staff have intentional instruction and supports for their social, emotional, and physical well-being. If that sounds right, then we can do a so moved.
So moved.
So movement by Trustee Woodley. He had his light on, so he gets the motion. Seconded by Clerk Rodriguez. Is there any discussion on the motion?
Could you read Pillar D again, please? D as in Delta.
Yes, absolutely. Pillar D would be number 1 as it reads in front of you, and the new combined 2 and 3 reads, school and district leaders use data and evidence to inform their strategic decision-making and communicate student progress with students and families on an ongoing basis. All right, excellent. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
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 Aye. All those opposed, nay. All right, motion carries 7-0. Great job, Dr. Ellsbury, and thank you so much, Dr. Enfield and your team for putting these together. I think that this was really strong because we started at a place of mutual understanding. We talked about the different values and priorities we had, and we landed in a really good, strong, solid place for our kids, our team, and our community.
I agree. Thanks to Dr. Enfield for all of her work to put these together. We'll point something out in this packet, just so you know what you have. my task will be now after today will be to take these indicators that you've selected. I'll create an evaluation tool that matches to those. And an example, this is an example of that tool, the rest of the pages, without any indicators placed in because I didn't know which ones you'd be selecting, okay? But I'll create a tool like this, I wanted you to be able to see what it would look like, okay? And then in addition to that, we've already pointed out, but in addition, feel free to take a look at this document. Now that we know which items we've selected, you can take a look at this document, which will give you a better idea of what types of data might be collected for each of those items as well. Okay.
Excellent. Well, that closes item 2.02. Now would be a good time to break for lunch if the team is interested in that. So we'll go ahead and we will pause for lunch. What are we thinking, 20 or 30 minutes? 20? All right, 20 minutes. So I will reconvene at 12:22. Thank you. All right, everyone. It is 12:25, so I'm going to call this meeting back to order. We're going to jump in right where we left things, which is opening item 2.03. This is the presentation and discussion to provide training on the superintendent performance evaluation process for Dr. Susan Enfield for the 2022-23 school year, scheduled to occur in October 2023. This is for presentation and discussion only. And just as a reminder to this board and to anyone listening, we are still wrapping up that school year because it goes July 1 to June 30th. So we are in the last gasps of that current school year right now. All right. Thank you, Dr. Alsbury.
All right. Thank you very much. So this last section, I'm hoping we can get through quickly. I think we should, of course, open to any questions that you have. So I'm not meaning to rush you, but we have already done all of these things. We've approved them. We've reviewed them. We just thought it would be a good idea, since we haven't looked at it since last year in October, that it would be a really good opportunity to just revisit what's about to happen. So we have an evaluation process that's coming up. It's going to start in August, I believe, as long as that works. That's going to be one of the things that I'm looking for to Superintendent Enfield today. What we do know is, and let me just get to the slide here, what we do know is that you all have set a goal of presenting to the public the final summative evaluation report on the October 24th, 2023 meeting. So what I've done with what you're looking at is I've tried to just reverse engineer the various things that have to happen so that that final date can in fact be met. So we need to, the first two steps we've really already done, and that's what you have in your workshop materials. So 2.03 materials, these are the list of indicators that you previously adopted, and this is the evaluation tool that will be used to evaluate the superintendent for this past year. So you can, and you've seen these already before, but just as a reminder. So what we need to do basically between now and October the 24th is that we need to create a final evaluation report which encompasses all of the trustees' viewpoints, so that it's not 7 different evaluations, but it's one summative evaluation that you have come to consensus around. Now the process, as a reminder, to do that is listed out on these next slides, and I'll just step through them rather quickly, and then I'll open it up to questions, and that'll finish us out for today. Now, let me say this, though, before I go through these steps. And there are, thank you, Trustee Nicolette kind of reminded me during the lunch break. She's right. There are a number of steps in this process first, and also you haven't been through this process, most of the trustees. So I understand that. Was anybody on when we did this? We did this once before with...
No, this is new
Okay.
to...
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
Trustee Nicolette.
And that was a few years earlier.
A few years ago,
But in
right.
this board universe, we're
Oh,
all
right.
new to it.
That's right. So let me just say this, that today we're going to review the steps, but plans have already been made because of the forethought of your president and superintendent, and there has already been an allocation in our agreement that I will be in contact with you for each of these steps. You'll receive an email from me with all the materials for each step, with an explanation of each step, and there's been time set aside so that at any point in this process, we can work, we can talk with each other, we can meet with each other, individual trustees and myself, to explain any of these steps as we go, okay? So even if you leave today after this rather quick review and say, I'm a little uncomfortable, that was a lot of steps, just know that I think the process will be fine. You'll have plenty of support from me, okay? So with that, let's go through the steps. So I think if this is doable, and the real, I think, key question that I have for Superintendent Enfield is this very first step, and that is submitting evidence that to the trustees so that you have the information on what has been achieved or accomplished over the course of the year, so that you are informed about the ratings and the comments that you're going to make on the evaluation. Obviously is important. So, and I'm sorry, Dr. Enfield, I'm putting you on the spot this way, and if you aren't sure, just say, I'm not sure, and we can adjust this timeline. This is just my best shot at a timeline, okay? There's nothing in concrete here. But the first thing that kicks all this off is that the trustees have to see any evidence, and is that possible to do in August? Do you even have the information that you need?
Yeah, no, we already have a process in place, but we actually start our Leadership Academy August 3rd, and school starts August 14th. So later in August is better because we're all going to be focused on getting school up and running. That's the priority. So as late in August as possible would be my preference. And so I actually have an email teed up here to my team members, and once we land on a date, they'll know, and we'll do it by that date.
Great. So would you you could just communicate, I'll make a note that late August, and then when you know if you can communicate a date so that I'm not jumping the gun?
Well, no, we can establish the date. I mean, I guess what I'm saying is how late in August can we do it and still adhere to your timeline? That's what I need to know.
Well, again, this was just my giving us lots of time, so if we need to start in late August, I would probably adjust this a little bit. I would scooch it forward a little bit. Some of these steps, so instead of being in August, will be in September, and that's fine.
So what about Friday, August 25th?
Great. That sounds great. All right. So after that information is provided, trustees, you will at that point receive from me this evaluation tool that you've previously approved. In that tool, and you're welcome to just kind of remind yourself, take a quick look, you'll see that there's two things to do. There will be a rating that you'll provide for each of the objectives that are listed, and also there's a place for you to write recommendations for growth and any commendations that you have. And I'll provide with you a reminder of how much time you have, but we'll be looking for a fairly quick turnaround of that document to be filled out. I would say no more than 2 weeks, and so we're looking at 1 to 2 weeks to fill that document out. You'll then return that document, so each of you will return your ratings and comments to me. At that point, I will then compile all the recommendations, that is the statements that you've written into your document. And by the way, this will come out as a digital document, so it's not a paper and pencil thing. You'll write in the digital document and then just send it back to me, okay?
I would like Trustee Nicolette here, having been through this process before, previously, in this particular case, there were 3,000 pages of evidence, and it was an impossibility within the time frame to go through that. So is there some kind of guardrails to help us so that we're efficient and effective?
I have put a maximum at 2,800 for the team. So I would like that measure of progress duly noted in my evaluation, Vice President Nicolette.
In that case, I would like that tomorrow.
No, we will, the team and I will only identify the most pertinent evidence possible. I don't think you need 30 examples of how we've made progress on a particular goal. We're going to identify what basically this is how it's going to go. So I've already talked with Michelle and Sang and now Emma as well, and Emma and Christina, but Emma will probably be running point on this to gather from each ELT member what their suggestions are around evidence towards the goals that are relevant to their world. And then what I'll do is I'll sit down and identify what I think are the most important and whether I think any need to be added. But it will, I can assure you, it will not come close to 3,000 pages.
Now, in addition, thank you. Great question. During this time, one of the other things that can happen, and I just want you to know that I'll be available, is if this is the first time for you in writing recommendations for growth and you find yourself saying, I'm not sure how one does that. I've never written a recommendation for growth. Two things. First, I'll be giving you some examples in the email that I send about this tool. So you'll be able to see how to do that. And then in addition to that, at any point, again, you can contact me and we'll get online together and we'll talk it through, and I'll even help you in writing these if you want the assistance in words, how you wordsmith things so that they're growth statements rather as opposed to critiques. Okay. So again, you have my assistance on that step. Once those all those statements are sent to me, I will then compile them into a single document, and they will be anonymized. That is, I won't list the comments by trustee name. We want the process to be as clean as it can be and objective as it can be. We want the comments to rest on their own qualities, their own character, and not connected to some individual that could potentially taint how we feel. So the comments will be just sent as one list. All of the comments will be included that are growth comments, all right? And so that will be there. At that point, along with those comments, I'll send to you a rating sheet, not unlike the one we used in October, where you'll be indicating which of those comments you feel very strongly need to be included in the evaluation, and then comments that you feel kind of neutral about. Yeah, I could take, this could, but it's not a necessity to be in the evaluation. And then you could even put a rating where you say, I don't really agree with this particular comment for growth. I don't think I would include that in the recommendation. So there's a rating scale on that. At that point, that after you've rated the comments that you feel strongly should be included into the document, those rating sheets will be sent back to me. I will then compile it, and again, not unlike we did last October, I'll basically be taking an average mean on those ratings, and ratings that are where you feel that it's important, the average rating of 3 or more, it's a rating scale of from 1 to 4, or that you feel strongly should be in the evaluation will go into the evaluation tool. And typically, when I've done this before, that's narrowed things down to a reasonable number of areas for growth. If we are in a situation where even after we look at the ratings, there's still far too many recommendations for growth, then we'll have to narrow it down even further, which I'll do that with you in October. The idea was that you would have a meeting that I was at, or a work session that I came with you. This would be the final draft then that I would put together with the comments that you rated, that you wanted to be included, along with the average rating that you made on each of the items, be a numerical rating. So it'll be a draft final report. And that would give us time to do the finalization of that report. And that would include if there's too many comments for growth, we could narrow it down to a reasonable amount if that were necessary, okay?
I just want to point out, President Smith, for the record, the only and next public meeting we have on this is that October 24th. So
Okay.
I'm very cognizant that we don't have meetings. We're all very busy. So this work is all happening in the background. And it's completely personalized based on the type of support that you need at different times through Dr. Ellsbury. Of course, any support that I could offer as well, too. But in order to keep our time respected, the only time we'll be doing the public meeting will be October 24th, and that's immediately preceding the regular meeting that day, so it is not a separate day outside of our schedule.
All right, and then that's really it. That's the process. The only other thing, just a reminder that these are the ratings terms that you all approved last year in October, and the rating number that you approved. And we had quite a discussion about this, you might recall, and this is what we came to. So this is what I'll be using. So when I take the average, the word rating or performance designation term that I'll use will be based on these average rating numbers that you see on the screen, okay? And then finally, just a reminder that this is the way that I'll look at the growth statements, that you'll rate those. So you can see here, if you say that it's critical to include this particular recommendation for growth, that would be 4. I would designate that as a 4. And then you can see the different choices that you have. And then statements that rate at 3 or higher on average, I would include that in the final draft of the report that we then would finalize together.
All right, this is going to be my plug. Based on the training we just had, when we get this document and we see it, let's try to not put all of our own statements as a 4, because then everything's going to be a 4. So when all these comments come out, I know I probably sound silly, but for the sake of saying it out loud, when we see the comments all together, we feel the thoughts from our 6 other colleagues. Let's evaluate this through the lens of us as a body and a shared entity when we make these evaluations. Because if Dr. Ellsbury gets back from all 7 of us that we've put as a 4 all of our things, right, well then everything is a 4. So that's going to be my public service announcement on that.
I also have a public service announcement, and this is for Superintendent Enfield. It's just a thought, having gone through this process before. I thought something that would have been very helpful. There were a lot of different important documents, and they were a reflection on all the work. And to bring it all together was a very difficult task because there were volumes of documents. Even with 3,000 pages, what could have been very helpful at that time was comments to bring certain documents together that reflected the information that the leaders and superintendent wanted, the points that they wanted to be salient, rather than all these documents without tying them together to paint a picture. That could have been very helpful.
Thank you, Vice President Nicolette. Well, I mean, first of all, we will only include documents that are very self-evident as to why they are there as evidence. They shouldn't need explanation, frankly. I think that you would need that kind of description to what you're saying if you had a vast number of documents and it was like, what am I looking at here? That said, I will be providing a cover memo to you with the evidence that outlines what you're getting and why it's important. And I will also be including things that I believe were important highlights from this school year that won't necessarily be reflected in those goals, because I think that's important. So there are some things that won't be reflected in those goals that I think it's important we take note of. And so, but I'll make sure that if there is any dot connecting needing to be done, that we will do that in the cover memo for you. Mm-hmm.
All right, and that's really it. I mean, that's the long and the short of it. So, yeah, and just I'll reiterate and then open it up to any questions that you might have. That typically in my email, when it comes time for you to do your ratings using this scale here. Thank you, President Smith. I actually include a similar public service announcement in my email and say, please don't. I know everybody's ideas are important. Don't put a 4 on everything. Please try to just put 4s and 3s on things that you feel absolutely need to be in this evaluation. It's a deal breaker for you. Try to focus on that as a reminder, because she's right. Otherwise, we're gonna have an unmanageable number of comments. So.
Thank you, Dr. Ellsbury. Any questions on that? Any clarifications? All right, I don't see any lights, so I'm going to take that as we're all clear, and we very much appreciate your guidance with all of this. All right, that closes out item 2.03, and now we'll go into section 3, our closing items. JJ, do we have any public comment for item 3.01?
Jeff Church.
Mr. Church.
Greetings, Jeff Church. I'll try to be very brief. Coming up in less than a month is a very important agenda item, and it's going to be basically the share proposal from June of last year. Myself and Dr. Nicolette were actually the two individuals that asked this be put on the agenda. So I wanted to put that on the record. July 25th, we're scheduled to, tentatively, we don't know till the agenda comes out, to hear the share recommendation. One of the quotes is, the motion passed unanimously. The language was changed to read, quote, girls and people with a vulva, boys and people with a penis for the 4th grade and the 5th grade education. Now, since I put that out and since I requested that, a number of things have come to my attention on the policy and the regulation that go with that. Very, very important. I'm not going to cover it here. I'm going to cover it in-house through the chain of command. And the only reason I come up today is because I'm very wary of open meeting law, doing everything in public, don't want to be accused of polling in private and violating open meeting law. So that's why I'm here doing it this way. But I will send that out to the leadership team to look at our regulations and our policy to see if we are in compliance or if this needs to be pulled. If it does get pulled, request we pull it as soon as possible so that the constituents know not to plan to attend. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Church.
That's all I have.
All right. Well, that closes item 3.01, and now at 12:47, I call this meeting adjourned. Thank you.